We build our lives on the comforting assumption that time eventually washes away the past, burying secrets beneath decades of silence. Yet, what happens when the passage of years is not a shield, but merely a slow countdown to exposure? Can a lifetime of flawless evasion truly be dismantled by a single microscopic speck of truth? In the early days of March 2009, a routine digital alert chimed within the cold case archives of the Los Angeles Police Department. Detectives stared at the glowing monitor. They struggled to process the impossible truth displayed across the screen. Forensic markers from decades of terror had finally locked onto a single verified name in the state registry. The match did not point to a deceased drifter or an incarcerated madman. Instead, it exposed a 72-year-old insurance claims adjuster living in a modest, sun-baked neighborhood. This single notification proved that a prolific phantom had been hiding right beside them the entire time. During the mid-1970s, the sprawling neighborhoods of western Los Angeles radiated a quiet, sun-drenched prosperity. Modest bungalows sat behind manicured lawns. Wide boulevards shaded by towering palm trees separated the properties. These homes belonged to a generation of resilient women, widows and grandmothers who valued their independence and cherished their twilight years. They maintained meticulous daily routines, tending to vibrant rose gardens at dawn and hosting weekly card games beneath the warm glow of porch lights. Their neighborhoods functioned as impenetrable sanctuaries, insulated from the chaos of the broader city by heavy metallic deadbolts and tight-knit community watch groups. Yet, this profound illusion of safety shattered when a shadow began moving through these exact zip codes. An unseen predator breached these locked doors, targeting these gentle matriarchs and stealing their futures in the dead of night. While fear gripped the affluent West Side, the architect of this misery built an orderly facade just miles away. John Floyd Thomas Jr. operated within the system, presenting himself to the world as a polite, dependable professional. He secured employment at a state hospital. He walked the polished linoleum corridors and gained deep knowledge of institutional routines. Later, he transitioned into a comfortable role as an insurance claims adjuster. This position demanded attention to detail and projected an aura of absolute trustworthiness. Neighbors saw a quiet family man who maintained his yard, paid his taxes, and offered polite nods across the property line. Behind his crisp suits and professional demeanor, he harbored a chilling arrogance, convinced that his superior intellect would forever shield him from the consequences of his nighttime activities. The localized reigns of terror proceeded in two distinct historical waves, pausing and removing with terrifying precision. The first sequence of home invasions ravaged the West Side throughout the 1970s, leaving shattered families and bewildered investigators in its wake. An eerie silence then fell over the city. The nightmare ignited again during the 1980s in the suburban enclaves of the Southland. In 1989, the attacks ceased as abruptly as they had begun. This sudden stop plunged the investigation into a permanent, agonizing freeze. Detectives possessed a mountain of biological evidence alongside harrowing testimonies from those who survived the nighttime ambushes. Despite holding the genetic blueprint of a monster, authorities lacked the one detail necessary to bring him down. The case languished in the archives because of a fundamental, infuriating flaw in the jurisdictional structure of Southern California. The West Side attacks fell under the strict purview of the Los Angeles Police Department. Entirely different municipal agencies handled the Southland cases situated over 20 miles away. Rigid departmental silos and incompatible paper-based filing systems prevented the exchange of crucial suspect profiles. Investigators sitting at desks miles apart possessed identical puzzle pieces but remained oblivious to each other. Bureaucratic protocol dictated that local agencies did not share biological evidence unless a specific cross-jurisdictional task force received formal authorization. Because of this absurd administrative barrier, law enforcement treated the two crime waves as the work of two entirely different phantoms. This structural failure granted John Floyd Thomas Jr. a pristine cloak of invisibility, allowing him to retreat into a comfortable retirement while victims' families drowned in unanswered questions. The tides of justice finally began to shift in the year 2004, driven by the relentless evolution of forensic technology. The Los Angeles Police Department established a specialized cold case unit. Supervisors tasked this unit with dusting off the forgotten bankers' boxes from the 1970s and 1980s. Dedicated analysts transported degraded biological samples from deep freeze storage into modern sterile laboratories. They extracted microscopic cellular material, applying advanced genetic sequencing techniques that did not exist during the original investigations. The resulting digital profiles shattered the long-standing theory of two isolated offenders. The computer network confirmed that the genetic signatures from the West Side scenes matched the Southland scenes with mathematical absolute certainty. The isolated local mysteries fused into a single colossal investigation, revealing one of the most prolific serial predators in the history of the state. Armed with this unified genetic fingerprint, detectives uploaded the data into the centralized state offender registry. They gathered around the terminal, expecting an immediate return that would finally name the phantom who had haunted their city for decades. The search query finished processing and returned 0 matches. The system held profiles for millions of convicted individuals, yet this specific genetic sequence remained unknown to the database. This dead end meant the perpetrator had either never been arrested for a qualifying felony, or his past convictions predated the mandatory collection laws. Investigators felt the crushing weight of disappointment. They realized that science alone could not breach a gap created by pure administrative luck. They were forced to wait, hoping that the aging phantom would make a critical mistake and cross paths with modern law enforcement. The investigation crept forward at an agonizing pace, stretching the patience of detectives who refused to let the case vanish again. Day after day, they combed through thousands of pages of typewritten suspect logs, searching for forgotten names that fit the geographical timeline. They interviewed retired patrol officers, tracked down outdated license plate registries, and chased down obscure tips provided by anxious citizens. Dozens of men were subjected to intense scrutiny. Officers followed them through the glowing sodium streetlights of the city, only to clear them by subsequent voluntary genetic testing. Each false lead drained municipal resources and inflicted a fresh wave of despair upon the investigative team. The quiet neighborhoods remained undisturbed, the hum of cicadas echoing through the same streets where the tragedy had originally unfolded. Through all these tedious, grinding efforts, John Floyd Thomas Jr. sat comfortable in his living room, untouched by the desperate hunt occurring just beyond his front door. The ultimate breakthrough did not emerge from a brilliant deductive revelation, but from a mundane legislative change regarding criminal processing. The state of California had recently implemented strict protocols requiring a biological swab from any individual implicated in a broader range of historic offenses. Decades prior, Thomas had faced administrative consequences for a completely unrelated, non-violent infraction. This event barely registered on the local judicial radar at the time. Because of his historic record, the new administrative mandates required him to submit a standard cheek swab for the updated National Registry. He complied with the order, likely believing that his youthful indiscretions carried no connection to his hidden nocturnal atrocities. He underestimated the reach of the interconnected digital networks utilized by modern forensic technicians. That single mandatory biological sample traveled through the postal system to the state laboratory, carrying the exact key needed to unlock 30 years of impenetrable darkness. The perfect evasion collapsed in late March of the year 2009, deep inside the secure forensic facility. The automated comparison software flagged a flawless, undeniable intersection between the newly submitted swab and the historic crime scene evidence. The glowing screen displayed the name John Floyd Thomas, Jr. The record included a current residential address located in South Los Angeles. Detectives pulled up city maps, tracing the geographical lines from his modest property to the very doorsteps where the victims had spent their final moments. The physical proximity was staggering, proving that the phantom had never fled the jurisdiction or retreated into the shadows of a distant state. He had remained rooted in the community, driving the same sun-baked avenues and shopping at the same grocery stores as the families he had destroyed. Law enforcement mobilized, assembling a tactical team to surround the unassuming residents before the elderly man could attempt an escape. Under the morning sun, unmarked cruisers converged on the quiet residential street. They blocked every avenue of retreat. Detectives approached the peeling paint of the front porch. The heavy metallic click of their holsters signaled the end of an era. They knocked on the wooden frame. The door swung open. A frail, 72-year-old man stared back at them. There was no dramatic standoff. There was no cinematic chase through the winding suburban alleys. The towering phantom offered no resistance as heavy steel cuffs secured his wrists. Inside the sterile walls of the downtown courthouse, the sheer magnitude of the systemic failure and the resulting tragedy came to light. Facing an insurmountable mountain of genetic evidence, John Floyd Thomas, Jr. realized his brilliant facade had disintegrated. To avoid the ultimate state sanction, he admitted his guilt to 7 counts of fatal assault, acknowledging the devastation he wrought upon the community. Despite this admission, seasoned investigators maintained their conviction that his reign of terror encompassed dozens of additional uncharged tragedies. The presiding judge delivered a sweeping, merciless verdict, stripping away the last remnants of the predator's freedom. He received multiple consecutive life sentences without the absolute possibility of parole. This mandate ensured he would never again walk the sunlit streets of California. The families of the victims finally watched the heavy courtroom doors close on the man who had stolen their loved ones, securing a quiet, long-delayed measure of peace. The quiet claims adjuster was transferred to a state correctional facility, trading his suburban comfort for the rigid, unforgiving concrete of a maximum security cell. His capture stands as a haunting testament to the power of scientific persistence over sheer administrative incompetence. The case forces society to confront the terrifying reality that the most destructive monsters do not hide in dark alleys, but behind polite smiles and manicured lawns. While the Los Angeles community found closure, the relentless pursuit of justice across the country proves that even the deepest secrets eventually rise to the surface. Science can unmask a phantom who has lived a lifetime of deception, but it can also return an identity to someone stripped of their name. Sometimes the most agonizing mysteries do not revolve around finding the perpetrator, but simply discovering who the victim was in the first place. This brings us to a freezing woodland in Pennsylvania, where an unmarked box held a secret that would baffle the world for 65 years. On a freezing February afternoon in 1957, a chilling discovery shattered the quiet woods of Fox Chase, Pennsylvania. A young boy lay lifeless inside a discarded bassinet box, his small frame bearing the heavy marks of chronic mistreatment. For 65 years, he remained a ghost to the world, known on headstones and in police files only as America's unknown child. The truth of his identity vanished into the cold winter air, leaving detectives grasping at shadows for over 6 decades. The mid-century landscape of Philadelphia represented a distinct era of American stability and neighborhood vigilance. Rows of brick homes lined the paved streets, framing a community where residents knew the daily routines of every face on their block. Mothers watched children ride tricycles down the sidewalks under the warm glow of sodium streetlights. Milkmen delivered glass bottles to front porches each morning, maintaining a steady rhythm of domestic predictability. Just a few miles away from these bustling domestic centers sat the dense, sprawling woods of Fox Chase. Tall, leafless trees formed a thick canopy over the rugged terrain, casting long shadows over Susquehanna Road. A narrow dirt path cut through the freezing brush, separating the safe suburban enclaves from an isolating wilderness. The sheer physical distance between the warm neighborhood hearths and this desolate dumping ground created a profound psychological barrier. Anyone stepping into this heavy timberland sought absolute concealment from the watchful eyes of the city. A normal 4-year-old boy in 1957 spent his days learning to navigate a widening world of toys and neighborhood friends. He possessed a recognizable face, a documented birthday, and a distinct place within a family photograph album. This child, however, existed entirely off the grid, deprived of the fundamental warmth and security every toddler deserves. Forensic examinations of his fragile remains painted a harrowing portrait of systemic, sustained deprivation occurring safely behind closed doors. Investigators noted profound malnutrition, indicating long periods where meals were deliberately withheld as a form of silent punishment. A patchwork of small healed scars covered his frail body, revealing a timeline of physical correction that spanned most of his short life. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the outside world never witnessed his suffering. His captors kept him hidden from doctors, neighbors, and teachers, erasing his presence from the public record entirely. The absence of any missing child report suggested a terrifying reality regarding the people meant to protect him. During this era, child welfare systems lacked the interconnected databases and mandatory reporting laws that track vulnerable youth today. Local jurisdictions operated in isolated silos, meaning a family could easily move across county lines and disappear without raising suspicion. Birth certificates remained physical pieces of paper tucked into municipal basement filing cabinets, entirely disconnected from any national registry. Authorities possessed no mechanism to track a child who never officially entered a public school system or a pediatric clinic. This rigid paper-based protocol allowed abusers to exploit massive administrative loopholes, maintaining absolute control over their victims. Neighbors who suspected mistreatment often adhered to strict social codes, choosing to respect the privacy of the nuclear family over asking invasive questions. The perpetrators understood this societal reluctance and wielded it as a shield to mask their domestic cruelty. The system essentially relied on the good faith of parents, providing no safety net for a child whose guardians chose isolation. This administrative void laid the groundwork for an enduring mystery, ensuring the boy remained a nameless phantom. On February 25, 1957, a local college student ventured deep into the overgrown brush of Fox Chase to check his rabbit traps. The biting winter wind rattled the bare branches as he pushed through the dense thickets near Susquehanna Road. His eyes caught sight of a large faded cardboard box resting partially concealed beneath a tangle of dry winter vines. The packaging originally belonged to a white wicker bassinet sold at a nearby department store, its printed lettering still visible on the side. Expecting to find discarded rubbish, the student leaned down and peered into the open top of the heavy carton. A plaid flannel blanket wrapped tightly around a small, motionless figure lying inside the corrugated walls. The realization of what he had found sent a wave of profound dread through the freezing woods. He abandoned his traps and rushed toward the nearest telephone to alert the Philadelphia Police Department. Within hours, a swarm of uniformed officers and detectives descended upon the quiet dirt path, transforming the desolate woods into a major crime scene. Investigators cordoned off a wide perimeter around the discarded bassinet box, meticulously combing the frozen ground for footprints or tire tracks. The physical geography of the dumping site suggested the perpetrator pulled a vehicle to the edge of Susquiana Road before carrying the heavy box into the tree line. Detectives noted the child's hair featured a rushed, choppy cut, with clumps of loose strands still clinging to his small shoulders. This grim detail indicated someone had hastily altered his appearance just moments before his tragic end. The medical examiner determined the boy had succumbed to blunt force trauma to the head, finalizing a short life defined by unseen cruelty. Law enforcement officials assumed a frantic mother or a remorseful relative would inevitably contact the precinct to report a missing toddler. They stationed officers at the station desk, waiting for a telephone call that would provide a name and an address. Days turned into a prolonged silence, baffling veteran detectives who had never encountered a nameless child left unclaimed by the community. Recognizing the unprecedented nature of this silence, the Philadelphia Police Department launched one of the most extensive public awareness campaigns in Pennsylvania history. Officers printed hundreds of thousands of toasters featuring a post-mortem photograph of the boy, carefully retouched to present him as he might have looked in life. Detectives walked block by block, taping these haunting flyers into the front windows of local grocery stores, pharmacies, and hardware shops. The police department partnered with the regional utility company to insert a copy of the child's face into every gas bill mailed across the city. This massive logistical effort ensured nearly every household in the greater metropolitan area stared into the eyes of the unknown boy. Authorities confidently believed this overwhelming saturation would corner the perpetrators or force a guilty conscience to break rank. Yet, the anticipated flood of credible tips never materialized, leaving the tip lines agonizingly quiet. The entire city of Philadelphia watched and waited, but the boy remained firmly unclaimed by anyone willing to speak his name. The investigation slammed into an impenetrable wall of silence, defying every conventional method of law enforcement. Detectives systematically tracked down the origins of every single item found at the Fox Chase dumping ground. Investigators visited the specific department store that sold the white wicker bassinet, pulling physical sales records to cross-reference every recent purchase. They identified only 12 buyers of that exact model, successfully tracking down 11 of those families to confirm their children remained safe. The 12th purchaser had paid in cash and left no forwarding address, effectively neutralizing the most promising piece of physical evidence. A dedicated medical examiner named Investigator Remington Bristow took immense personal ownership of the case, refusing to let the boy fade into a cold file. Bristow spent his evenings consulting pediatricians to determine if the child's distinct surgical scars pointed to a specific localized medical procedure. He organized search parties to comb the broader Pennsylvania countryside, looking for abandoned foster homes or unrecorded orphanages that might harbor unregistered children. Despite executing dozens of search warrants based on anonymous letters, Bristow found only empty cellars and unrelated municipal violations. The exhaustive legwork yielded countless boxes of typed reports, none of which brought law enforcement closer to a definitive name. 3 years into the active investigation, Bristow directed his attention toward a large foster home located just 1.5 miles from the Susquehanna Road dump site. The physical proximity of this estate made it a glaring focal point for detectives desperate to anchor the crime to the local geography. Bristow arrived at the sprawling property with a small team of officers to conduct a thorough environmental assessment of the grounds. During his inspection of a rear storage shed, he noticed a wicker bassinet identical to the one associated with the discarded cardboard box. Further examination of the clothesline revealed plaid blankets hanging in the breeze, mirroring the exact pattern of the fabric found wrapped around the victim. Bristow theorized the child belonged to the unwed daughter of the foster home operator, suggesting a tragic domestic accident covered up to avoid public scandal. He pursued this angle relentlessly, interrogating the staff and demanding detailed medical records for every transient youth housed within the facility. However, formal police interviews and polygraph tests provided no verifiable proof to link the foster family to the boy in the box. The department ultimately cleared the operators, leaving Bristow frustrated by a profound lack of physical corroboration and ending another major avenue of pursuit. Sensing the absolute necessity for a technological intervention, investigators initiated a formal legal process to exhume the child's remains in the year 1998. Forensic anthropologists delicately opened the sealed casket, hoping to extract a viable sample from the degrading enamel of his baby teeth. Laboratory technicians utilized early mitochondrial extraction methods, a painstaking process that sequences genetic material inherited exclusively from the maternal line. Unfortunately, the biological degradation caused by decades of subterranean moisture rendered the extracted samples too fragmented for any meaningful comparative analysis. The physical science of the late 1990s simply lacked the microscopic precision required to read the damaged genetic code. Technicians carefully returned the remains to the earth, sealing the vault while the scientific community labored to improve forensic capabilities. Detectives maintained a strict chain of custody on a small sliver of preserved bone, locking it inside a climate-controlled evidence vault. They recognized that patience remained their only viable strategy against a complex puzzle they could not yet solve. The heavy burden of identification shifted entirely from street-level detective work to the sterile, quiet halls of advanced genetic laboratories. The dawn of the new millennium brought renewed hope when a stunning psychological development emerged in the year 2002. A psychiatrist contacted authorities in Ohio regarding a patient identified in police files only as Martha, or simply as the letter M. Martha claimed her abusive mother had purchased the unknown boy from another family in 1954, subjecting him to years of severe mistreatment in a Philadelphia suburb. She provided harrowing, hyper-specific details about the boy's final evening, recounting a severe physical punishment involving baked beans that culminated in his tragic end. Martha even described the hasty haircut her mother administered before they drove to the Fox Chase Woods to abandon the bassinet box. Detectives flew to Ohio to conduct intensive interviews, noting her testimony aligned perfectly with undisclosed forensic evidence regarding the contents of the child's stomach. The sheer specificity of her narrative convinced several veteran investigators they had finally cracked the impenetrable mystery. They believed this hidden witness would finally provide the narrative puzzle pieces required to close the massive case file. However, significant logistical hurdles quickly emerged when detectives attempted to verify her physical presence in the Philadelphia area during 1957. Investigators began combing through property deeds and neighborhood census records to corroborate Martha's claims about her childhood home. They located the exact house she described, but neighbors who lived on the block during the mid-1950s emphatically denied any boy ever lived at that address. Psychiatric evaluations of Martha further complicated her reliability, revealing a complex history of severe mental health struggles that cast doubt on her fragmented memories. Legal protocols demanded physical evidence or a secondary witness to secure an indictment based on a decades-old recovered memory. The district attorney reviewed the sprawling case file and determined the state possessed absolutely no empirical data to corroborate the startling confession. Without matching fingerprints, dental records, or a secondary confession, prosecutors refused to move forward with any formal charges against Martha's deceased mother. The promising lead completely unraveled, leaving detectives staring at the same stark reality they faced on that freezing February morning. The boy remained in an unidentified ward of the city, buried under a modest headstone funded by the very officers who failed to name him. The investigation stalled once more, trapped by the rigid limitations of 20th century law enforcement techniques. By the year 2019, the landscape of criminal forensics had experienced a monumental shift toward advanced genetic genealogy. The Philadelphia Police Department authorized a secondary exhumation. Partnering with elite biotechnicians who possess the tools to extract complex nuclear markers from severely compromised skeletal material. Scientists ground a minuscule portion of the preserved bone into a fine powder, applying powerful chemical solvents to isolate the deepest strands of the child's genetic blueprint. This meticulous laboratory procedure bypassed the limitations of early mitochondrial testing, successfully generating a comprehensive profile of the boy's ancestry. Analysts took this pristine data and uploaded the markers into massive open-source genetic databases, casting a digital net across millions of civilian profiles. The algorithm immediately flagged several distant cousins, providing investigators with the first empirical breadcrumbs tracing back to the child's actual bloodline. Genealogists began the arduous task of reverse engineering family trees, charting birth certificates, census records, and marriage licenses from the early 20th century. This deliberate, step-by-step mapping process slowly narrowed the massive pool of relatives down to a single, intersecting familial branch in Pennsylvania. For the first time in 62 years, the elusive phantom materialized into a tangible web of verifiable human connections. Throughout the autumn of 2022, the genealogical net tightened around a specific couple residing in West Philadelphia during the early 1950s. Detectives secured a court order to obtain targeted genetic samples from living descendants of this specific family line. Laboratory technicians ran the comparative analysis, staring at computer screens as the digital markers locked into place with absolute certainty. The biological match was undeniable. The phantom had a family. He had a history, he had a name. The scientific data confirmed the parents were a prominent local man and a young woman, neither of whom had ever reported a child missing to any authority. This revelation exposed a terrifying reality regarding the very people entrusted with his care. The predators responsible for his chronic mistreatment and subsequent erasure were not passing strangers, but figures hiding in plain sight within his own household. Armed with the incontrovertible genetic proof, investigators pulled the original birth certificates from the State Vital Records Department. They located a document stamped in the year 1953, validating the existence of a boy born to that exact biological pairing. The paper confirmed he was not an undocumented transient, but a recognized citizen whose short life was systematically dismantled by those closest to him. His name was Joseph Augustus Zamari. The immense psychological weight of this discovery rippled through the precinct, bringing veteran detectives to tears. The arrogant deception perpetrated by his guardians had successfully manipulated the rigid administrative protocols of the 1950s. They relied on the blind spots of the legal system to discard a human life like unwanted refuse in the freezing woods. The sheer audacity of their silence allowed them to live out their lives completely free from criminal consequence. Yet, the relentless march of biological science ultimately shattered their perfect evading act. In December of 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department held a solemn press conference to officially announce the breakthrough to the world. The police commissioner stood behind a wooden podium, speaking the name Joseph Augustus Zamari into a microphone, permanently erasing the moniker of America's unknown child. Authorities confirmed that both of Joseph's biological parents had long since passed away, escaping earthly justice for their roles in his tragic demise. The district attorney acknowledged the insurmountable legal hurdle of pressing retroactive homicide charges without living primary suspects or concrete witnesses to the final act of violence. Despite the lack of a criminal trial, the identification provided profound moral justice for a child discarded and forgotten by his own blood. The living relatives, entirely unaware of the dark secret harbored by their ancestors, expressed deep shock and sorrow upon learning of Joseph's existence. The bureaucratic loopholes that permitted his abusers to maintain their silence have long been closed by modern mandatory reporting laws and centralized databases. The scientific triumph successfully concluded the longest-running unidentified child case in the history of the United States. Shortly after the public announcement, caretakers at the Ivy Hill Cemetery prepared to alter the physical monument that had stood over the boy for decades. A stone mason arrived with heavy tools, chiseling the name Joseph Augustus Zamaray directly into the granite marker under the shade of a large oak tree. The citizens of Philadelphia gathered around the quiet plot, placing new toys and fresh flowers upon a grave that finally bore a true identity. The unyielding dedication of generations of detectives ensured that Joseph would never again be reduced to a nameless victim in a cardboard box. His story stands as a powerful testament to the enduring pursuit of truth, proving that no secret remains buried forever when science refuses to yield. The heavy silence of the Fox Chase Woods finally lifted, allowing a stolen identity to reclaim its rightful place in history. However, the American landscape holds many dark stretches of road where entirely different types of predators operate in the shadows. Just decades later, another phantom utilized the sprawling, transient nature of the interstate highway system to leave a trail of devastation across the Midwest. The terrifying reality of the Interstate 65 corridor would soon prove that even the most highly mobile evaders cannot outrun the microscopic truths left behind at the crime scene. In the early months of the year 2022, investigators inside a sterile Indiana State Police laboratory stared at a microscopic sequence of genetic code glowing on a computer monitor. For 35 years, an invisible phantom had haunted the stretches of Interstate 65, leaving behind zero eyewitnesses and an atmosphere of absolute dread. The biological signature belonged to a man who had stolen the futures of multiple hotel clerks across 2 states. Detectives had chased thousands of dead-end leads, hunting a sophisticated transient predator. Yet, the screen displayed the name of an everyday track worker for the Canadian Pacific Railway. The dreaded Interstate 65 killer was never a criminal mastermind hiding in the shadows. He was a man named Harry Edward Greenwell living unnoticed among the very people he terrorized. The American interstate system during the late 1980s promised boundless freedom for cross-country travelers. Interstate 65 carved a massive concrete artery straight through the rural heart of Kentucky and Indiana. Endless ribbons of asphalt cut through dense forests and vast cornfields. Every few miles, towering illuminated signs cast a neon glow over the dark landscape, beckoning tired motorists to roadside motels. These budget lodgings provided temporary refuge, anchored by the glowing lobbies that served as beacons in the deep night. Inside these lobbies, solitary night auditors kept the operations running while the rest of the world slept. The physical geography of these motels made them highly vulnerable. They sat mere feet from the highway on ramps, allowing anyone to vanish into the high-speed traffic within seconds. Vicki Heath lived a grounded life in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, dedicating her nights to the front desk of the local Super 8 motel. She was a devoted mother who brought warmth to the sterile lobby, arranging the coffee station and preparing paperwork for the morning rush. 2 years later, and over 200 miles north, Margaret Peggy Gill manned the desk at a Days Inn in Merrillville, Indiana. She spent her overnight shifts balancing the ledgers, looking forward to returning home to her family in the morning light. Further down the exact same highway in Remington, John Gilbert worked a nearly identical job at another Days Inn. Jean was an active member of her local church and a dedicated mother of 2 teenagers. These women occupied the same precarious space in the dead of night, separated by vast stretches of highway but united by their vulnerability. Their routine centered on customer service and quiet diligence. They remained unaware that the dark parking lots outside held a highly mobile predator. The illusion of roadside safety shattered on the morning of February 21st, the year 1987, in Elizabethtown. A frantic guest dialed the police after discovering the lobby of the Super 8 motel completely abandoned. Law enforcement arrived to find the cash register emptied and signs of a severe physical struggle behind the front desk. Officers mapped the perimeter, moving past the main building toward the desolate rear parking lot, bordering a thick line of winter trees. There, investigators made a grim discovery beside a commercial dumpster. Vicky Heath had met a brutal, permanent end in the freezing darkness. The unknown assailant had left behind physical evidence, but the freezing temperatures and the immediate proximity to the highway offered no direction for the trailing officers. The perpetrator had merged back into the flow of interstate traffic, leaving local authorities grappling with an absolute vacuum of information. 2 years progressed with total silence from the phantom traveler. Then, on March 3rd, the year 1989, the terror struck twice in a single, highly coordinated night. In Merrillville, Indiana, morning staff arrived at the Days Inn to find Margaret Gill missing from her post. The safe stood open, depleted of all cash, while Margaret lay lifeless in a dark corner of the building. Less than an hour later, police in Remington, Indiana, received an identical call regarding Jean Gilbert at a separate Days Inn located 70 miles south on Interstate 65. Authorities found the Remington lobby deserted, the register drained, and no sign of the devoted mother. Motorists traveling along a rural road in White County eventually located Jeanne. She had suffered the exact same grim fate as the others, leaving investigators staring at a perfectly executed, synchronized sequence of terror. Investigators from Kentucky and Indiana converged, realizing they faced an unprecedented jurisdictional nightmare. Detectives collected shell casings from the Merrillville and Remington crime scenes, transporting them to the Indiana State Police Laboratory. Ballistics experts examined the microscopic striations on the brass under high-powered lenses. The firing pin impressions matched with absolute certainty, confirming that the same weapon ended the lives of Margaret Gill and Jeanne Gilbert. However, linking the 1987 Elizabethtown case required analyzing biological evidence collected from Vicky Heath. Detectives extracted seminal fluids, preserving them in glass vials, hoping to find a match in the national systems. The law enforcement infrastructure of the late 1980s lacked a centralized biological database, forcing detectives to rely entirely on mailed fingerprint cards and teletype messages. This systemic fracture allowed dangerous transients to cross state lines without triggering any red flags among regional police departments. The investigation expanded outward, requiring detectives to drive to neighboring counties to review open case files. On January 2nd, the year 1990, a clerk at a Days Inn in Columbus, Indiana, faced the exact same predator. The assailant forced his way over the counter, demanding cash and initiating a violent physical assault. In a desperate surge of survival instinct, the clerk fought back, managing to break free and escape the lobby. The attacker fled into the freezing night, leaving behind biological material on the carpet. Forensic technicians collected these critical samples, securing them alongside the vials from the previous crime scenes. Detectives spent the following weeks interviewing every single guest registered at the Columbus motel, analyzing license plates, and canvassing nearby gas stations. They established a physical perimeter of 5 miles around the motel, checking toll, booth records, and highway surveillance footage. Despite these exhaustive manual efforts, the perpetrator left no distinct paper trail, operating strictly in cash and utilizing stolen vehicles. Law enforcement refused to abandon the expanding boxes of physical evidence. During the mid-1990s, detectives systematically reviewed every single armed robbery conviction occurring along the Interstate 65 corridor. They requested hundreds of physical prison records from Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois, searching for inmates with histories of motel robberies. Officers spent countless hours sitting in state penitentiaries interviewing incarcerated men who matched the physical description provided by the Columbus survivor. The suspect was described as a tall man with greasy graying hair and a lazy green eye. Detectives manually checked this description against thousands of booking photographs, utilizing magnifying glasses to inspect eye characteristics on Polaroid prints. They submitted the preserved biological evidence to the newly established national database, checking the system weekly for any uploaded profiles. The machine consistently returned negative results, highlighting the strict legal loophole that allowed countless paroled felons to evade routine biological sampling. The physical evidence waited in a climate-controlled locker until the year 2019. The Indiana State Police partnered with the Federal Bureau of Investigation to utilize the emerging science of investigative genetic genealogy. Laboratory technicians extracted a microscopic fraction of cellular material from the preserved evidence, converting the biological matter into a comprehensive digitized DNA profile. Analysts uploaded this digital string of genetic code into public genealogy databases, searching for distant familial matches. The system identified second and third cousins scattered across the American Midwest, providing the first tangible thread in 3 decades. Genealogists constructed a massive family tree on large whiteboards, tracing ancestral lines back to the late 19th century. They mapped out birth certificates, census records, and marriage licenses, following the branches forward in time. This exhaustive process narrowed the vast pool of humanity down to one specific family branch residing in Kentucky. The genealogical web pointed straight to a man named Harry Edward Greenwell, a seemingly ordinary worker for the Canadian Pacific Railway. Detectives pulled his historical records, discovering a staggering trail of systemic failures and ignored red flags. Greenwell possessed a massive criminal history dating back to the year 1963, including armed robberies and a daring prison escape from the Kentucky State Penitentiary. Despite his extensive record of extreme violence, the parole board released him back into society, granting him unrestricted access to the interstate highways. His employment on the railroad provided the perfect cover for a highly mobile lifestyle, allowing him to traverse the Midwest without drawing local suspicion. He utilized the vast network of tracks and highways to slip between jurisdictions, exploiting the communication gaps between state police departments. The realization horrified investigators. The phantom they hunted had hidden in plain sight, protected by bureaucratic incompetence and rigid parole loopholes. Law enforcement needed definitive proof to permanently close the historical snare. Greenwell himself remained outside their physical reach, requiring investigators to locate his immediate living relatives. In the early months of the year 2022, undercover officers approached a close family member of Greenwell in a quiet suburban neighborhood. They explained the gravity of the historical investigation and requested a voluntary biological sample. The relative consented, providing a simple cheek swab that officers rushed to the state laboratory. Technicians fed the swab into the sequencing machine, initiating the final comparative analysis against the genetic profile extracted from the victims. The monitor displays a definitive, undeniable mathematical match binding Harry Edward Greenwell to the interstate horrors. The absolute truth eclipsed the long shadow of the elusive predator, definitively solving one of the most haunting mysteries in the Midwest. The long arc of justice reached a bitter conclusion as investigators learned the ultimate fate of their target. Harry Edward Greenwell had succumbed to severe cancer in January of the year 2013, passing away in a hospital bed in New Albin, Iowa. He avoided the cold steel of handcuffs and the absolute isolation of a maximum security prison cell. His death certificate served as his final evasion, a quiet exit for a man who caused immeasurable destruction. However, the conclusive genetic match allowed the Indiana State Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to officially close the cases. Law enforcement organized a solemn press conference, standing before a room of reporters to announce the permanent unmasking of the Interstate 65 killer. The announcement stripped away his anonymity, ensuring history would remember him not as a phantom, but as a cowardly thief. The families of Vicky Heath, Margaret Peggy Gill, and Jean Gilbert received the concrete answers they had sought for over 3 decades. The revelation did not erase the profound absence at their holiday tables, but it shattered the agonizing uncertainty that had defined their lives. The children of the victims, now adults, expressed a profound relief that the truth had finally surfaced from the dark archives. The exhaustive dedication of forensic genealogists proved that no predator can outrun their own biology. Even the most careful offenders leave behind microscopic signatures that will patiently wait for technology to catch up. Across the country, this exact same genetic science was unearthing another devastating truth. In a sun-baked California suburb, another seemingly harmless elderly man was about to face the microscopic consequences of his own horrific past. April 19, 2018, a quiet residential block in Citrus Heights, California sits under the amber glow of suburban streetlights. Detectives in an unmarked vehicle watch an elderly man place a green trash bin at the edge of his driveway. The man turns his back and shuffles toward his front door. An investigator steps out of the vehicle, crosses the damp pavement, and opens the plastic lid. He extracts a single discarded tissue from the refuse. That crumpled piece of paper holds the microscopic genetic code required to unmask the most prolific phantom-like predator in state history. The decades-long reign of terror ends with household garbage. During the mid-1970s, the new suburbs of Sacramento, California offered a profound sense of security. Families moved into single-story ranch homes surrounded by manicured lawns, tall wooden fences, and quiet cul-de-sacs. Neighbors knew one another by their first names, leaving front doors unlocked and bicycles resting on front porches. Young couples built their lives around backyard barbecues, local school events, and peaceful evening walks under sprawling oak trees. The residents believed they lived in a sanctuary far removed from the urban dangers of major cities. Women like Jane Carson went to sleep trusting the thin glass of their sliding patio doors to keep the night outside. Husbands worked late shifts confident their spouses and children remained perfectly secure behind standard lock sets. The architecture of these neighborhoods featured vast networks of paved trails, flood control channels, and utility easements running directly behind the residential lots. Planners designed these greenbelts for afternoon recreation and pleasant scenery. They inadvertently provided a shadowed, interconnected highway for a predator who operated in the dark. The intruder transformed this architectural paradise into a vast hunting ground. He spent hours watching families through their windows, mapping the exact layout of their hallways, bedrooms, and property lines. Before launching an attack, he entered the homes while the residents were away at work or running errands. He unloaded the defensive firearms hidden in bedside tables, unlatched back windows, and planted bindings under couch cushions. When he returned in the dead of night, he woke couples from their deep slumber by shining a blinding flashlight into their eyes. He forced the husbands onto their stomachs, binding their wrists with tight shoelaces or nylon cords. To ensure psychological domination, the assailant balanced small porcelain teacups or heavy dinner plates upon the backs of the bound men. He whispered a chilling promise that if he heard the dishes rattle, everyone in the house would meet a permanent, fatal end. The victims endured hours of psychological torture in their own bedrooms. listening to the intruder rifle through their personal belongings and consume food from their refrigerators. He shattered their fundamental sense of home, turning places of comfort into enduring scenes of trauma. The community trusted law enforcement to stop the terror, unaware the predator wore a police uniform during his daylight hours. Joseph James D'Angelo served as a sworn officer for the Exeter Police Department and later the Auburn Police Department. He drove a marked patrol cruiser, responded to citizen complaints, and attended high-level briefings regarding local criminal activity. His specialized training provided him with an encyclopedic knowledge of investigation protocols, search, grid formations, and response times. D'Angelo knew the exact minutes it took for dispatchers to relay a distress call and for the first officers to arrive on a scene. He exploited systemic boundaries by crossing county lines, aware that neighboring sheriff departments did not share evidence. He monitored police radio frequencies on a portable scanner, tracking the locations of the deputies hunting him. By day, he presented himself as a dedicated public servant tasked with upholding the law and protecting the innocent. By night, he used his state-funded training to stalk the very citizens he swore an oath to defend. The relentless string of home invasions and subsequent fatal attacks stopped in the spring of 1986. The final known assault took the life of 18-year-old Janelle Cruz inside her family residence in Irvine, located in Southern California. She was a vibrant young woman who loved spending time with her friends and dreamed of building a bright future. The assailant vanished into the massive population of the state, leaving behind a fractured trail of biological evidence across 10 different counties. Detectives in Northern California spent years chasing the man they called the East Area Rapist. 400 miles to the south, investigators in Orange County and Santa Barbara hunted a perpetrator they named the Original Night Stalker. The vast geographic distance between the crime scenes created insurmountable communication barriers between the agencies. Detectives worked in isolation, storing physical evidence in separate lockers and filing reports under different suspect profiles. The system designed to catch criminals fragmented the investigation into useless, disconnected pieces. The true scope of the horror remained hidden in these disconnected filing cabinets for another 15 years. In the year 2001, the landscape of criminal investigations underwent a fundamental technological shift. Scientists developed advanced methods to extract and compare genetic material left behind at old degraded crime scenes. Investigators in Southern California submitted biological samples from their unsolved fatal attacks to a centralized state laboratory. Technicians ran the genetic profiles through the system and received a stunning alert from the database. The computer connected the DNA from the Irvine scene directly to the biological evidence collected from the home invasions in Contra Costa County during the late 1970s. The realization sent a shockwave through the law enforcement community across the entire state. The distinct, isolated regional predators were actually the exact same man. A single, unified task force formed to combine the decades of neglected case files into one massive chronological map of terror. The investigators now knew the scale of their target, but they still lacked a name, a face, and a current location. The task force fed the unified genetic profile into the combined DNA index system, the national database known as CODIS. The investigators waited for a match, expecting the system to spit out the name of a known career criminal. The screen returned 0 results. The system required a suspect to have a prior felony conviction that mandated a genetic swab upon entering the prison system. Because the perpetrator evaded capture throughout his life, his biological signature did not exist in any law enforcement registry. Investigators faced a massive brick wall built by privacy laws and rigid procedural protocols. The statute of limitations for the early assaults expired due to archaic legal loopholes drafted long before the advent of genetic testing. Prosecutors could no longer file charges for the hundreds of home invasions that occurred in the 1970s. even if they identified the man. They could only pursue the final fatal attacks that carried no expiration date under state law. The task force watched years tick by as conventional detective work yielded nothing but dead ends and exhausted leads. Detectives waded through a swamp of useless tips and false confessions generated by intense media coverage. Citizens called hotlines to report eccentric neighbors, estranged husbands, and odd co-workers who lived in the area during the attacks. Investigators interviewed hundreds of men, pulling them from their workplaces to collect cheek swabs and rule them out. One prominent dead end involved a man named Brett Glasby, a Goleta resident whose criminal history and geographic proximity made him a prime suspect in the Southern California attacks. Detectives spent months building a circumstantial case against him, mapping his addresses against the locations of the targeted homes. The theory collapsed when laboratory technicians compared Glasby against the unified genetic profile and found zero similarities. Entire filing cabinets filled with promising suspect dossiers went straight into the incinerator. The task force spent millions of taxpayer dollars running genetic tests on dead men and innocent citizens. The invisible predator remained hidden behind the sheer volume of the population, laughing at the futile efforts of the specialized police units. In the year 2017, investigator Paul Holes decided to abandon the traditional law enforcement databases. He recognized that the official systems contained only the genetic codes of convicted felons, leaving an enormous blind spot covering millions of ordinary citizens. Holes extracted an old, degraded sample of evidence preserved from an attack in Ventura County and sent it to a specialized laboratory. The technicians generated a comprehensive genetic file detailing the specific markers of the suspect. Holes bypassed the restrictive government channels and created a fake profile on an open-source consumer genealogy website called GA Match. People around the world use this public platform to trace their family trees and find distant relatives. Holes uploaded the biological code of the unknown attacker into a database meant for family hobbyists. He hit enter and watched the screen populate with a list of third and fourth cousins who shared tiny fragments of the same genetic sequence. He possessed the branches of a massive family tree, and he now needed to trace those branches down to the root. Holes partnered with professional genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter to construct the sprawling ancestral network. The team worked backward through census records, marriage certificates, and newspaper obituaries dating back to the early 1800s. They identified a set of great-great-grandparents who lived in New York during the 19th century. From that distant anchor point, the investigators built out every single descending branch of the family line. They mapped out hundreds of relatives tracking births, migrations, and marriages across the continent over 5 generations. The process required intense focus, cross-referencing fragile paper documents with modern public records to ensure no individual slipped through the cracks. The investigators eliminated entire branches of the family tree by ruling out women, men who lived in different states, and relatives who were too young or too old. They focused on men who lived in California between the years 1974 and 1986. The sprawling web of thousands of individuals narrowed down to a single hyper-specific cluster of brothers and cousins. The genealogical net tightened around a man who fit the physical description, the geographic timeline, and the age parameters. Joseph James DeAngelo emerged from the historical records like a ghost stepping into the sunlight. Investigators pulled his biography and found a chilling alignment with the profile they constructed decades earlier. DeAngelo owned a home in a Sacramento suburb located mere minutes from the sites of the earliest home invasions. He possessed a degree in criminal justice and served as a police officer in the exact towns where the terror first began. Detectives discovered the Auburn Police Department fired him in the year 1979 for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. The timeline of his termination matched the exact moment the predator escalated his crimes and moved his hunting grounds to Southern California. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with terrifying precision, revealing a man who hid behind a badge to facilitate his darkest impulses. The task force now needed undeniable physical proof to authorize an arrest warrant. Law enforcement initiated a covert surveillance operation in the quiet neighborhood of Citrus Heights. Undercover agents established perimeters around D'Angelo, observing the 72-year-old man as he ran mundane errands and tended to his front lawn. They kept their distance, knowing the suspect possessed extensive police training and a history of extreme volatility. The operation required patience as the team needed D'Angelo to discard an item containing his genetic material in a public space where privacy laws no longer applied. Detectives watched his vehicle parked at a local hobby store and managed to swipe a sample from the door handle, but the result proved too degraded for court. They waited until trash collection day, creeping up to the green bin resting at the edge of the street pavement. An investigator retrieved a discarded tissue and rushed it to the crime laboratory in Sacramento. The technicians isolated the microscopic cells left on the paper and aligned them against the profile collected from the decades-old crime scenes. The computer confirmed a definitive absolute match. April 24, 2018, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveways of Canyon Oak Drive. A specialized apprehension team formed a quiet perimeter around the single-story residential home. They knew D'Angelo kept firearms staged throughout his house, ready to initiate a lethal standoff at the first sign of trouble. The team needed to draw him out of his fortified structure and neutralize the threat before he could access his weapons. Officers staged vehicles down the block and prepared a precise tactical maneuver. A small group of agents approached the front door while others secured the side gates leading to the backyard. They knocked on the front door with deliberate force, demanding the homeowner step outside. The heavy wooden door clicked open, and the frail-looking 72-year-old man stepped onto his front porch. The agents swarmed the porch before D'Angelo could process the situation or retreat behind the doorway. They grabbed his arms, spun him around, and clamped heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The man who spent a lifetime binding innocent people in the dark now found himself immobilized in the bright afternoon daylight. Detectives stared into the face of the monster who stole the peace of mind from an entire generation of Californians. D'Angelo offered no physical resistance, his arrogant demeanor crumbling under the sudden, overwhelming force of the apprehension team. Officers cleared the interior of the residence, discovering weapons, tools, and mementos hidden in the dusty corners of his bedroom. The meticulous predator made a fatal miscalculation by underestimating the persistence of the detectives he once viewed as his inferiors. The Phantom was a captive prisoner. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo initiated a massive legal reckoning that captivated the nation. Prosecutors from 6 different counties formed a unified coalition to ensure the former police officer faced justice for his vast catalog of crimes. The state charged him with 13 counts of a fatal attack and 13 counts of kidnapping associated with a robbery, to spare the surviving victims the trauma of a prolonged trial. Prosecutors agreed to a complex plea deal in the year 2020. D'Angelo stood inside a makeshift courtroom located in a university ballroom, forced to face the people he had tormented for decades. He entered guilty pleas to the specific charges and admitted to dozens of uncharged assaults that fell outside the statute of limitations. The arrogant predator stood stripped of his power, forced to listen as survivors detailed the immense psychological damage he inflicted upon their families. The judge condemned D'Angelo to multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He bypassed the death penalty due to his advanced age and the structure of the complex plea agreement, ensuring he would take his final breath inside a concrete prison cell. The verdict delivered profound closure to the affected communities and validated the tireless, unprecedented work of the genetic genealogy pioneers. D'Angelo lost his freedom, his anonymity, and his final shred of control. Confined to a rigid institutional existence, the shadows that once concealed him were flooded with the undeniable light of modern science and absolute truth. Yet, while his reign of terror ended in a massive courtroom victory, another mystery lay abandoned on a lonely stretch of asphalt, waiting 40 years for a single drop of preserved evidence to speak. In November 1980, investigators stood over the unidentified form of a teenage girl near a Texas highway, her stolen name demanding to be found. On the morning of November 1st, 1980, the nameless body of a teenage girl was discovered discarded near a rural Texas highway. For over 40 years, she remained a permanent, unidentified fixture in local lore, her true identity hidden behind administrative chaos and the sheer limits of analog technology. It took a single vial of preserved tissue, saved by a forward-thinking medical examiner, and the relentless advance of modern genealogy to finally restore her stolen name. Stillwater, Minnesota offered a crisp northern climate that contrasted with the restlessness inside 14-year-old Sherry Ann Jarvis. She possessed a quiet determination, navigating a world that often felt too small for her independent spirit. Truancy became her silent form of rebellion against rigid educational structures she simply did not understand. State authorities intervened, viewing her absences not as a cry for understanding but as a strict violation of protocol. Social services removed the teenager from her familiar surroundings, placing her into a localized group home. This administrative decision severed her last remaining tethers to familial safety. She viewed this state custody not as a refuge, but as an unbearable cage. Driven by an urgent need for autonomy, she packed a small bag and walked away from the facility. She set her sights on the vast expanse of the southern states. She stepped into a wider world that remained unprepared to protect her. The year 1980 operated under a different set of administrative rules. Cross-state communication between law enforcement agencies relied on paper teletypes and slow physical mail. A teenage girl crossing state lines vanished into a massive administrative void. Sherry hitched rides along the sprawling concrete ribbons of the interstate highway system. She moved through a lonely landscape of fading roadside diners and neon-lit gas stations. Truckers and casual travelers passed her by, unaware of the profound vulnerability hidden beneath her polite demeanor. The distance between Stillwater, Minnesota, and Huntsville, Texas, spans well over 1,000 miles. This sheer physical distance guaranteed that localized missing posters in the north would never reach southern bulletin boards. She eventually arrived in Walker County, a place dominated by tall pine trees and the imposing architecture of state penitentiaries. She was a mere child navigating a harsh adult landscape, carrying only a few coins and her quiet resilience. The evening of October 31st, 1980, brought a heavy chill to the East Texas air. Sodium streetlights cast long, yellow shadows across the sprawling asphalt of the hitching post truck stop in Huntsville. Waitresses and patrons noticed a polite, soft-spoken teenager wandering the premises alone. She asked several individuals for directions to the nearby Ellis Prison Farm. The imposing penitentiary stood miles away, isolated by dense patches of dark woods and empty fields. Witnesses noted she wore a yellow blouse and a silver necklace adorned with a small cross. She turned down an offer of a ride, insisting she could walk the distance herself. The patrons watched her step out into the encroaching darkness of the highway shoulder. No one intervened to stop a 14-year-old from wandering alone into the remote pine woods at night. She stepped beyond the safety of the glowing truck stop, fading into a permanent, tragic silence. The sun rose on the morning of November 1st, casting a pale light over Interstate 45. A commercial truck driver traveled north, passing the rural stretches just outside the city limits. His headlights caught a strange shape lying on the grassy shoulder. Mere feet from the speeding traffic, the driver brought his heavy rig to a halt, stepping out into the deafening hum of passing cars. He approached the figure, hoping to find someone merely resting by the roadside. Instead, he made a grim discovery that would haunt Walker County for 4 decades. The young girl from the truck stop lay motionless in the tall grass, having met a brutal, permanent end. Her yellow blouse and silver cross remained, but any form of identification was absent. Patrol cars soon flooded the scene, their flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the morning dew. The highway transformed into a sprawling theater of investigation, marking the beginning of an agonizing mystery. Walker County detectives descended upon the rural stretch of Interstate 45, establishing a wide perimeter. Investigators scoured the damp grass for footprints, tire tracks, or any discarded belongings. They found no purse, no wallet, and no identification cards of any kind. The medical examiner took possession of the young girl, documenting her physical traits with clinical precision. Law enforcement initiated their standard protocols for unidentified persons in the year 1980. They took posthumous photographs, attempting to restore a sense of peace to her features for public distribution. Police artists drafted composite sketches, highlighting her youth and the specific shape of her silver cross. Detectives distributed these images to local newspapers and television stations across Houston and Dallas. However, the strict jurisdictional borders of the era created an invisible wall around the investigation. Missing persons reports generated in Minnesota remained trapped in filing cabinets over 1,000 miles away, invisible to Texas authorities. Seeking any immediate local connection, investigators canvassed the immediate perimeter of Huntsville. Detectives returned to the Hitching Post truck stop, questioning every employee who worked the evening shift on October 31st. The waitress provided clear descriptions of the polite teenager who asked for directions to the Ellis prison farm. Law enforcement drove the exact route from the diner to the prison, mapping the dark, empty miles. They questioned inmates and guards at the penitentiary, searching for any visitor logs or expected guests matching her description. The prison records yielded 0 matches, leaving detectives to wonder why she sought that specific location. Investigators cross-referenced local runaway reports from surrounding Texas counties, turning up blank pages. They sent physical teletypes to neighboring state police departments, detailing her yellow blouse and distinct jewelry. The days turned into weeks as the teletype machines remained silent. The rigid limitations of analog communication guaranteed that Sherry Ann Jarvis would remain trapped behind the moniker of Walker County Jane Doe. Recognizing the immediate limits of their reach, the county made a solemn decision regarding her final resting place. Authorities organized a local funeral, relying on the quiet generosity of Huntsville residents. Strangers gathered to pay their respects to a child they never knew, disturbed by the profound injustice of her anonymity. She was laid to rest in the Oakwood Cemetery, under a headstone reading simply unknown white female. Yet before the earth covered her casket, the medical examiner made a crucial, forward-thinking decision. The pathologist preserved a small tissue sample in a vial of formalin, placing it into the county evidence locker. This rigid clinical protocol secured a physical anchor to her identity long before the invention of modern genetic profiling. The small vial sat in a dark, temperature-controlled room alongside countless other forgotten pieces of evidence. Detectives rotated out of the department, retiring and passing the cold case files to younger officers. The paper records gathered dust, but the preserved tissue waited for science to catch up to its secrets. By the late 1990s, forensic science experienced a monumental shift with the introduction of database profiling. Walker County authorities decided to revisit the Jane Doe file with renewed determination. In the year 1999, investigators secured a court order to physically exhume her remains from Oakwood Cemetery. Workers broke the earth over her grave, bringing her casket back to the surface after nearly 20 years in the dark. Forensic anthropologists extracted bone samples, hoping to pull a clear genetic signature from the marrow. Technicians processed the bone fragments in advanced laboratories, attempting to build a comprehensive profile. Unfortunately, the harsh degradation caused by the elements over 2 decades compromised the cellular material. The extraction yielded an incomplete signature, insufficient for upload into the national databases. The profile generated 0 matches, and the hopeful lead dissolved into another profound disappointment. Sherry was returned to her grave, the mystery of her identity locked away in the earth. Another 20 years passed, bringing the chronological timeline to the year 2020. The landscape of forensic investigation transformed, shifting toward the precise science of genealogical tracing. Walker County detectives, refusing to abandon the young girl, partnered with Othrem Incorporated, a specialized laboratory located in Texas. Investigators bypassed the degraded bone samples from the exhumation, turning instead to the original evidence locker. They retrieved the small glass vial of formalin-fixed tissue reserved during the initial autopsy in 1980. The chemical preservation process used in the past cross-linked and damaged genetic structures, presenting a massive technical hurdle. Scientists at the laboratory employed advanced sequencing machines to untangle the chemical bonds. They spent hundreds of hours piecing together the fragmented, microscopic strands. Their painstaking labor bypassed the limitations of traditional matching, building a comprehensive profile from the nearly destroyed tissue. This immense technological triumph provided a tangible key to unlock a 40-year-old door. The laboratory digitized the complete genetic signature. Technicians uploaded the data into secure genealogical networks. The servers processed millions of distinct data points. The digital algorithms traced vast ancestral trees. The system mapped distant cousins and forgotten historical lineages. The digital web spread out from Texas, stretching far into the northern states. The search zeroed in on a specific family cluster residing in Minnesota. Investigators analyzed public records to build the family tree downward toward the present day. They identified a specific set of parents who had lost a child in the late 1970s. The sheer geographical distance between the crime scene and the family home made terrifying sense. Detectives picked up the phone. They dialed the number for a family residing in Stillwater, Minnesota. Law enforcement introduced themselves to relatives who had spent 40 years living in a state of suspended agony. Investigators asked about a young girl who vanished in the autumn of 1980. The family confirmed the exact tragic details. They spoke of a 14-year-old girl named Sherry Ann Jarvis. They described her habitual truancy and restless spirit. They recounted her strict placement in a state facility. They detailed the heartbreaking day she walked away, never to be seen again. The decades of agonizing silence shattered in a single, devastating afternoon. Detectives requested direct samples from the surviving family members. The laboratory performed a direct microscopic comparison. The individual markers aligned perfectly. The scientific verification provided absolute, undeniable certainty. The nameless girl in the Texas cemetery had her identity restored. The systemic failure that kept her hidden was dismantled by raw, indisputable science. The arrogant predator who discarded her on the highway had relied on distance and administrative chaos. That geographical distance no longer existed. The heavy veil of anonymity was torn away. The unyielding truth stood under the harsh light of modern justice. In November 2021, Walker County authorities stood before a bank of microphones and television cameras. Detectives announced the true identity of their oldest unidentified person. They spoke the name Sherry Ann Jarvis aloud, honoring the 14-year-old child whose future was stolen on a dark highway. The press conference reached the Minnesota community. closing the painful gap between the two distant states. Surviving family members released a statement expressing their profound gratitude to the relentless investigators and brilliant scientists. They received the agonizing closure they had sought for over 40 years, replacing false hope with tragic certainty. Authorities updated her headstone in the Oakwood Cemetery, carving her true name into the solid stone. The profound dignity of identity was returned to the quiet girl from Stillwater. The relentless march of technology proved that no secret remains buried forever. The systemic gaps of the past could no longer protect the perpetrators of the present. The restoration of her name marked the end of one agonizing journey, but it ignited the beginning of another. Walker County investigators shifted their focus from identification to active, relentless pursuit. With her exact point of origin established, detectives could now trace the precise route she took south from Minnesota. Law enforcement began re-interviewing individuals associated with the Texas prison system in the year 1980. They cross-referenced historical visitor logs with new geographical data, hunting for the individual who intercepted her journey. The perpetrator remains unidentified, but authorities now possess the crucial context necessary to narrow their search. The absolute certainty of genetic science ensures that investigators will never stop pursuing accountability. Every cold case file holds the potential to unravel, given enough time and unwavering determination. Yet, the deep waters of the American South held other discarded secrets waiting for the light of truth. During December 1982, a further tragic mystery emerged as the remains of a baby girl were found floating under an interstate bridge in Mississippi's Escatawpa River. In December 1982, the freezing currents of the Escatawpa River concealed a devastating secret beneath the concrete pillars of the Interstate 10 bridge. A commercial truck driver crossing the bleak stretch of Mississippi Highway reported an unsettling sight. He saw a distressed woman pacing the shoulder, clutching a small child against the biting wind. Days later, authorities pulled the lifeless frame of an infant girl from the murky waters. For 38 years, this tiny victim bore only the name Delta Dawn on a donated granite headstone. Her true identity remained locked away in a vault of forgotten evidence. It would take decades of relentless genetic science to finally unmask the truth and expose the phantom predator who stole her future. Long before the tragedy on the dark highway, Gwendolyn Clemens lived a quiet, unassuming life in the bustling mining town of Joplin, Missouri. The year was 1982, a time when sprawling neighborhoods of mossed wooden homes lined the Midwestern streets. Gwendolyn was 23 years old, navigating the profound challenges of raising her 18-month-old daughter, Alicia. Alicia was the center of her mother's universe, a bright-eyed toddler who brought joy to their cramped but loving household. Every morning, Gwendolyn followed a strict routine to ensure her daughter had clean clothes and warm meals. She dreamed of escaping the stifling Midwestern winters and building a fresh, prosperous life under the southern sun. Her hopes mirrored those of countless young mothers seeking a better horizon for their children. Florida represented a beacon of warmth and opportunity, a pristine paradise far removed from her past struggles. Gwendolyn gathered her meager savings, packed their essential belongings into worn canvas bags, and prepared for a monumental journey. The physical distance between the cold streets of Joplin and the sunny beaches of Florida spanned over 1,000 miles of desolate highways. Gwendolyn did not plan to make this arduous trek alone, trusting her fate to a male companion who offered them safe passage. They loaded into his vehicle, leaving behind the familiar glow of the Joplin streetlights and venturing into the unknown shadows of the American South. Family members waved goodbye, unaware that this ordinary departure marked the final time they would ever see Gwendolyn or little Alicia. The route took them south through the Ozark Mountains, crossing expansive rivers and winding through dense pine forests. Along the way, the towering trees cast long, suffocating shadows across the cracked asphalt of the interstate. The vehicle moved relentlessly toward the Gulf Coast, carrying a fragile family toward an unseen darkness. The companion promised a fresh start, projecting an aura of reliability that masked his true, chilling intentions. Gwendolyn trusted this man to navigate the isolated stretches of road, oblivious that he was driving them straight into an inescapable nightmare. The sprawling architecture of the Interstate 10 bridge stretches heavily over the Escatawpa River in Jackson County, Mississippi. The concrete spans rise high above the dark, swirling currents below, creating a desolate, wind-swept corridor surrounded by dense marshland. On the night of December 3, 1982, the temperature plummeted, leaving the highway cloaked in a thick, freezing mist. A long-haul truck driver rumbled across the bridge, the harsh glare of his headlights cutting through the heavy fog. Through the windshield, he spotted a lone woman walking dangerously close to the edge of the elevated highway. She appeared in immense distress, her shoulders shaking as she held a small bundle tightly against her chest. The trucker reached for his radio, feeling a deep, instinctual dread about a mother and child stranded in such a perilous location. He reported the disturbing sighting to local authorities, hoping a patrol cruiser would reach them before the freezing conditions took a toll. The dispatch crackled through the quiet night, sending deputies rushing toward the river crossing to investigate the alarming report. The responding officers arrived to find the vast expanse of the bridge deserted, with only the wind howling through the massive steel girders. They scoured the shoulders and the surrounding embankment, sweeping their heavy flashlights across the damp concrete, but the woman and child were gone. 2 days later, a boater navigating the shallow, murky waters of the Escatawpa River made a grim discovery near the bridge pilings. The lifeless form of a female infant bobbed in the freezing current, her tiny lungs having permanently stopped drawing breath. First responders rushed to the muddy riverbank, wrapping the child in a heavy wool blanket to preserve whatever trace evidence remained. The coroner determined someone had forcibly stolen her breath before she ever entered the icy water, ruling out accidental drowning. Investigators connected the infant to the trucker's distressed woman, realizing the sighting was the final desperate moment of a hidden struggle. A massive coordinated dragnet swept the sprawling marshlands, deploying drivers to probe the deep mud for the missing mother. Despite endless days of searching through the dense reeds and murky water, Gwendolyn had vanished into thin air, leaving her daughter without a name. Detectives in Jackson County faced an impossible geographic puzzle, possessing a child victim with no identification and a sprawling transient highway as their crime scene. The local sheriffs plastered the infant's face across local newspapers, hoping someone in the quiet coastal communities would recognize her. Tips flooded the switchboards, but each lead dissolved into frustrating dead ends because the child did not belong to anyone in Mississippi. The strict jurisdictional boundaries hampered the investigation, as missing persons reports from Missouri never crossed the desks of Southern detectives. In 1982, the fragmented nature of law enforcement databases created a massive systemic failure, allowing missing children to slip through gaping bureaucratic cracks. Local authorities operating on paper files and rotary telephones had no mechanism to connect a missing Joplin mother with an unidentified Mississippi infant. The male companion operating in the blind spots of the national highway system drove away from the area without a single toll booth camera capturing his license plate. Without a name, the investigative trail froze solid, forcing the community to adopt the tragic child as their own. They named her Delta Dawn, burying her in a local cemetery beneath a beautiful granite stone donated by grieving citizens. The rigid protocols of the era dictated that unidentified remains stay buried unless a specific matching missing persons report triggered an exhumation. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the heavy rain and oppressive southern humidity weathered the lettering on Delta Dawn's headstone. Detectives retired, passing the dusty, yellowing case file down to younger investigators who viewed the mystery as an unsolvable relic of the past. Meanwhile, in Missouri, Gwendolyn's family faced their own agonizing bureaucratic wall as local police dismissed her sudden absence as a voluntary disappearance. Officers in Joplin wrongly assumed Gwendolyn had cut ties to start a new life, refusing to classify her as a victim of foul play. This catastrophic legal loophole allowed the predator to evade suspicion, as no agency actively hunted for a missing mother or her child. The family hired private investigators and distributed countless flyers, but their desperate efforts failed to breach the massive distance between Missouri and Mississippi. The perpetrator relied on this immense geographical separation, confident that the two isolated police departments would never share their records. He lived unbothered for decades, shielded by a fragmented justice system that demanded a physical body before it would acknowledge a crime. The profound silence surrounding the case broke in 2019, when a newly formed cold case unit dusted off the original file. Law enforcement officials secured a court order to exhume the infant's remains, hoping modern science could accomplish what traditional detective work could not. Forensics experts stood under the heavy branches of the cemetery oaks, carefully raising the small casket from the Mississippi soil. They transferred the fragile remains to a sterile, brightly lit laboratory, tasked with extracting genetic material from bones degraded by 37 years of moisture. The forensic anthropologists faced a monumental challenge, as the extreme southern heat had compromised the cellular integrity of the evidence. Scientists meticulously cleaned the bone fragments, utilizing specialized chemical washes to remove decades of environmental contamination before attempting extractions. They successfully isolated a microscopic sequence of DNA, securing the crucial biological blueprint needed to rebuild the child's identity. The investigators sent this fragile digital profile to a specialized private laboratory, bypassing the massive backlogs of the state crime labs. This decisive action circumvented the rigid state protocols that had stalled countless other investigations, proving that relentless innovation could overcome bureaucratic stagnation. The private laboratory uploaded the infant's genetic sequence into massive publicly accessible genealogical databases, mapping out a vast web of distant cousins. Genetic genealogists spent grueling months constructing complex family trees, tracing surnames and migration patterns back through several generations of Midwestern families. They mapped the physical distances between great-grandparents, narrowing the biological search grid from the entire United States down to a single state. The genetic markers consistently pointed toward the Ozark region, drawing a definitive digital line directly to the town of Joplin, Missouri. Investigators analyzed census records and historical birth certificates, ruling out hundreds of relatives until they found a single missing branch on the family tree. They discovered a woman named Gwendolyn Clemens who had vanished in 1982 alongside her infant daughter. Armed with this exact historical timestamp, Mississippi detectives contacted Missouri authorities, bridging the massive informational gap that had protected the predator for decades. They requested a direct DNA swab from Gwendolyn's surviving sister. Knowing a maternal match would shatter the mystery of Delta Dawn, the sterile cotton swab traveled 1,000 miles back to the laboratory, carrying the final biological key required to unlock the past. The sterile hum of the laboratory equipment served as the backdrop for a revelation 38 years in the making. The computer algorithms aligned the sister's genetic sequence with the infant's DNA, producing an undeniable maternal match. The nameless baby pulled from the freezing currents of the Escatawba River was definitively recognized as 18-month-old Elisha Heinrich. This single scientific truth triggered a cascading collapse of the predator's perfect evasion, instantly connecting the Joplin disappearance to the Mississippi tragedy. Detectives laid the two timelines side by side, realizing the distressed woman on the bridge was undoubtedly Gwendolyn, desperately trying to protect her child. The male companion had promised them a beautiful future in Florida, only to stop on a dark, desolate bridge to execute a horrific betrayal. He forced Gwendolyn out of the vehicle into the freezing fog, ending their journey in the most brutal, permanent manner imaginable. The terrifying reality washed over the investigators, as they understood the predator had driven back into the night, leaving his victims to the dark river. He hid in plain sight for the rest of his life, confident that the water would never surrender its secrets. Armed with the restored identities, detectives pivoted their crosshairs onto the male companion who had orchestrated the trip. They dug through historical motor vehicle registries and old police reports, tracing the man's movements in the days following the disappearance. The records revealed he had indeed traveled down to Florida alone, returning to Missouri weeks later with contradictory stories about Gwendolyn's whereabouts. He told her family she had decided to stay down south and start a new business, fabricating a cruel illusion that she had abandoned them. His web of deception relied on the era's lack of communication, isolating the family in their grief while he walked free. The investigators prepared to arrest him, drafting the heavy legal warrants required to hold him accountable for the devastating betrayal. However, the crushing hand of time had already intervened, robbing the justice system of a grand courtroom finale. The detectives discovered that the prime suspect had met his own permanent end in 2002, dying unaware that genetic science was coming for him. The predator escaped a physical prison cell, but his dark legacy was permanently shattered by the brilliant, unyielding light of modern forensics. In December 2020, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office stood before a bank of news cameras to finally speak Elisha Heinrich's name aloud. The announcement brought a heavy closure to a Missouri family who had endured nearly 4 decades of agonizing uncertainty. Law enforcement officially closed the case of Delta Dawn, ordering a new bronze plaque to replace the anonymous headstone that had marked her grave. The local Mississippi community, who had protected the child in death, gathered at the cemetery to mourn the toddler they finally knew. The definitive scientific identification fundamentally altered the legal landscape of the case, officially transitioning Gwendolyn Clemens from a missing person to the victim of a fatal crime. The authorities modernized the search for Gwendolyn's remains, deploying new sonar technology to map the deep riverbeds surrounding the Interstate 10 bridge. Though the suspected perpetrator was dead, the authorities publicly named him in their files, ensuring history recorded his guilt and his monstrous deception. The systemic failure that allowed him to slip away became a permanent lesson for modern police academies studying cross-jurisdictional communication. Alicia's tragic journey ended not in the shadows of a muddy river, but in the sterile exact certainty of a DNA laboratory. Her story stands as a monumental testament to the sheer power of forensic science to bridge massive geographical divides and correct historical injustices. The predator banked his entire freedom on the silence of the dead, never anticipating that biological markers would eventually speak louder than a confession. The family finally found a measure of peace, knowing exactly who had stolen their loved ones and exactly how the tragedy unfolded. The meticulous detective work proved that no secret remains perfectly buried forever, no matter how deep the water or how dark the night. While Alicia's anonymity was shattered by the dedication of modern scientists, she was not the only young victim left unidentified along a bleak riverbank, over 1,000 miles away. Another devastating discovery inside 3 discarded suitcases was about to unravel a similar thread of familial deception. December 1976, the banks of the Lehigh River in Pennsylvania. 3 worn suitcases resting on the frozen embankment hold a grim secret. A young pregnant woman nameless for 44 years. waits in the bitter cold for justice. Someone erased her identity and stole her future. Familial genetics shattered that decades-long silence. The final truth exposed not just her hidden name, but the trusted companion responsible for the ultimate betrayal. Jersey City, New Jersey. During the mid-1970s, the urban landscape features towering brick apartment blocks, narrow avenues, and the distant hum of factory industry. Sodium streetlights cast long shadows over cracked sidewalks where tight-knit families build quiet lives. Among these families are the Colons striving for a stable future in a bustling neighborhood. Their daily routines revolve around shared meals, local corner stores, and deep community bonds. Evelyn Colon is 15 years old. She radiates youthful hope and carries a quiet warmth that anchors her household. Her gentle nature makes her a beloved sister and daughter in a home filled with bustling activity. The world around Evelyn shifts when she crosses paths with 19-year-old Luis Sierra. Sierra projects an aura of maturity and control that captivates the young teenager. He soon moves her into a shared apartment, creating a physical boundary between Evelyn and her family. The new residence sits just blocks away, yet the emotional distance feels vast. Sierra dictates their daily schedule and limits her interactions with her parents. Evelyn, anticipating the birth of her first child, focuses entirely on preparing for motherhood. She decorates her small space and dreams of a bright future for her unborn baby. Her parents notice her growing absence from family gatherings. The tight bonds of the Colon family begin to fray under Sierra's commanding presence. January 1977 arrives with a bitter chill across the East Coast. The Colon family mailbox holds an unexpected delivery that changes their lives forever. A stamped letter arrives supposedly written by Evelyn and her companion. The note claims the couple moved away to Connecticut for a fresh start. It commands the family not to worry and cuts off any further communication. This calculated document acts as a psychological barrier for her concerned parents. Believing their daughter simply wanted independence, they decide against filing an official missing person report. Sierra weaponizes their trust, creating a fabricated narrative that blinds law enforcement. The paper trail ends right there, leaving Evelyn isolated in the minds of her loved ones, miles away in Carbon County, Pennsylvania. The landscape tells a much darker story. The Lehigh River winds through dense snow-covered woods near the town of Whitehaven. Tall pine trees obscure the steep embankments leading down to the freezing water below. On December 20th, 1976, a teenage boy wanders along the rocky riverbank. His eyes catch sight of 3 large suitcases resting in the frost. He approaches the heavy luggage, noticing a foul odor hanging in the frigid air. The boy forces open the first locked case. He uncovers the concealed tragedy of an unknown female and her unborn child. This grim find marks the beginning of the Beth Doe mystery. Local authorities swarm the frozen embankment, securing the dense woods surrounding the suitcases. Investigators catalog the physical evidence piece by piece. They document a unique chenille bedspread wrapped around the tragic cargo. Detectives trace the manufacturer of the blanket, hoping to find a local buyer. They also analyze the specific brand of the suitcases, mapping out every store that sold that luggage model. Fingerprint technicians dust the handles, but the winter elements leave behind no usable ridges. Forensic experts examine the young victim, noting she carried a full-term baby. They extract dental records, hoping a local dentist might recognize the intricate fillings. Every tangible lead evaporates into the cold mountain air. The investigators circulate sketches of the young woman in local newspapers. They broadcast her description across television networks throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Hundreds of tips flood the police switchboard from concerned citizens. Detectives interview runaway girls, local transiviants, and missing person families across the eastern seaboard. None of the descriptions match the dental records of the unknown victim. A specific tip directs them to a runaway from Ohio, sparking a temporary wave of hope. Detectives spend weeks driving across state lines to verify the Ohio lead, only to find the girl alive and well. The massive physical search hits a complete dead end. The unknown girl earns the name Beth Doe, a permanent placeholder for a stolen identity. The years transition into the 1980s, and the physical files accumulate dust in the evidence room. Detectives retire, passing the heavy boxes to a new generation of investigators. In the late 1990s, forensic science introduces advanced deoxyribonucleic acid profiling. State troopers exhumed the remains in 2007, hoping to extract a genetic profile from her bones. The laboratory technicians grind the preserved bone fragments to extract the genetic material. They upload the profile to national criminal databases, waiting for a digital match. The computer systems return 0 results, proving the perpetrator never entered the federal registry. The technological marvel of the early 2000s fails to pierce the veil of anonymity. The victim remains locked inside the Carbon County Cemetery under a nameless plaque. The year 2020 brings a groundbreaking shift in investigative protocol. A dedicated state trooper revisits the crumbling evidence boxes stored in the precinct basement. He retrieves the victim's preserved bone marrow sealed securely in a sterile container decades prior. The trooper packages the fragile sample and ships it to a private specialized laboratory in Texas. Scientists at this facility utilize complex genetic genealogy, a process matching sequences to public ancestry registries. The laboratory machines sequence the entire genome over several weeks of continuous processing. Analysts map out the chromosomal connections, branching out to distant cousins and extended family members. They manually build sprawling family trees on massive whiteboards. The ancestral paths converge on a single household in New Jersey. The genetic branches point directly to the Colon family in Jersey City. Detectives knock on the door of the stunned relatives, initiating a profound conversation. The family members provide a fresh biological sample to confirm the exact lineage. The laboratory cross-references this new sample with the 1976 bone marrow. The results yield an absolute, undeniable match. The tragic figure known as Beth Doe officially reclaims her given name Evelyn Colon. Detectives cross-reference her name with missing person databases, finding absolutely no formal record. The fabricated letter from 1977 reveals its true, sinister purpose. The investigators realize the perpetrator constructed an illusion of life to mask a permanent end. Armed with her true identity, cold case detectives immediately trace Evelyn's historical timeline. They focus entirely on the last person to share her daily life. Records from the 1970s point straight to Louise Sierra. Investigators dig through property deeds, tax records, and utility bills spanning 4 decades. They track Sierra's movements from New Jersey to a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in New York. The man who orchestrated a masterclass in deception now lives a comfortable, ordinary existence. He blends perfectly into his suburban environment, attending neighborhood events and walking the tree-lined streets. His arrogance allowed him to believe he permanently outsmarted the justice system. The detectives set up discreet surveillance units outside his modest residence. The surveillance teams monitor Sierra for several days, mapping his exact routine. Plainclothes officers position themselves at the end of his driveway during the early morning hours. As Sierra steps out of his front door, the task force moves in with calculated precision. Detectives surround him, cutting off any potential avenue of retreat. The heavy metallic click of handcuffs shatters his decades-long illusion of freedom. The investigators transport him to the local precinct, sitting him inside a barren, fluorescent-lit interrogation room. They place the faded 1976 photographs of the suitcases squarely on the metal table. Sierra stares at the irrefutable evidence of his past actions. The horrific reality that he hid in plain sight for 44 years crashes down upon him. Authorities charge Sierra with criminal homicide for the deaths of Evelyn and her unborn baby. The local community watches in disbelief as the mild-mannered senior citizen faces a judge. Prosecutors build a massive circumstantial case, preparing to present the forensic timeline in court. However, the American legal system contains rigid borders and strict geographical protocols. In the year 2025, the defense attorneys file a crucial pre-trial motion. They argue that Pennsylvania lacks the legal authority to prosecute the crime. The defense demonstrates that the fateful event most likely occurred inside the shared apartment in New Jersey. The perpetrator merely transported the suitcases across state lines after the fact. The rigid borders of the judicial system turn a clear conclusion into a complex bureaucratic nightmare. The judge reviews the exact legal statutes governing interstate jurisdiction, bound by the strict letter of the law. The Pennsylvania court dismisses the criminal homicide charges. The precise location of the tragedy creates an infuriating legal loophole. A master manipulator uses a paperwork technicality to temporarily evade a prison cell. This jurisdictional conflict highlights a massive systemic failure that leaves the victim's family reeling in agony. Prosecutors in New Jersey must now restart the complex legal machinery from scratch. Evelyn Kollern finally has her name, but her fight for absolute justice remains trapped in courthouse bureaucracy. Another chilling mystery waits on the other side of the globe, far from the legal battles of the American East Coast. In 1948, a sharply dressed man washed ashore on an Australian beach, carrying a secret that would baffle military intelligence for 74 years. The morning sun crested over the gray horizon of Somerton Beach in December 1948, casting long shadows across the damp sand. A suited man rested motionless against the concrete seawall, his head slumped forward as if asleep. His pockets held no identification, and every single manufacturer tag had been deliberately cut from his clothing. For 74 years, this unknown figure ignited wild international espionage theories and endless speculation until a microscopic fragment of hair dismantled the grand illusion. The city of Melbourne in the 1940s was an industrial hub, humming with post-war rebuilding efforts. Brick factories lined the Yarra River, pushing dark plumes of smoke into the sky while trams rattled along the cobblestone streets. Far removed from the glamour of international espionage, the reality of working-class Australia was built on rigid routines and quiet domestic struggles. Carl Webb lived exactly this kind of life. He was a brilliant instrument maker and electrical engineer, a man who worked with precision and quiet focus. His hands knew the exact tension of wires and the delicate balance of machinery. Neighbors saw a respectable professional walking down suburban sidewalks, carrying a leather satchel and keeping his head down. He blended perfectly into the gray fabric of the city. Beneath this orderly surface, a profound sorrow anchored his daily existence as Webb carried a documented history of severe melancholy that alienated those closest to him. Webb found solace in the precise rhythmic structure of translated Persian poetry, reading late into the night while the city slept outside his window. His mind constantly sought patterns and meaning in a world that felt fractured. His home life mirrored this internal fracture. The walls of his Melbourne house echoed with the bitter collapse of his marriage to Dorothy Robertson. The tension in their domestic space grew thick-built on unspoken resentments and rigid expectations. Dorothy packed her belongings and left the residence, seeking refuge miles away from his unpredictable moods. Webb lost his emotional anchor. The quiet rooms of his house became a prison of isolation. He descended into a deep personal crisis, fixated on finding his estranged wife and restoring the order he had lost. His journey would soon take him across state lines into a tragedy that history would misinterpret for decades. The pristine coastline of South Australia stretches along the Gulf St. Vincent, bordered by low sea walls and coastal shrubs. Early on the morning of December 1st, 1948, local residents walked along the damp shoreline of Somerton Beach, located just outside the city of Adelaide. They noticed a man wearing a double-breasted suit and polished leather shoes resting against the concrete barrier. He appeared out of place against the backdrop of ocean waves and coastal wind. His body held no signs of physical trauma, lacking the brutal marks of a violent struggle. A half-smoked cigarette rested gently on his collar, unlit and undisturbed by the morning breeze. First responders arrived and cordoned off the sandy perimeter, initially assuming a natural medical failure. The forensic pathologist later opened the man to find profound internal congestion. Medical experts suspected an untraceable, fast-acting toxin. Though the exact chemical evaded 1940s toxicology testing, investigators cataloged the objects found on the deceased man. They pulled a comb, a pack of chewing gum, and matches from the suit, but no wallet or identification card. A keen-eyed detective examining the trousers noticed a hidden fob pocket stitched deep into the waistband. His fingers extracted a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of printed paper. The investigators flattened the torn fragment to read two strange words printed in elaborate font. The paper read "Tom Shoed," a Persian phrase translating roughly to "it is ended." Detectives recognized the words from the final page of a famous poetry book called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. This single piece of paper launched a relentless media frenzy. Newspapers printed the cryptic phrase across front pages, obscuring the true identity of the lonely engineer resting in the morgue. The quiet tragedy of Carl Webb mutated instantly into an international puzzle. Weeks turned into painstaking labor as South Australian police scoured the city for any trace of the unknown man. Detectives canvassed local hotels, boarding houses, and train stations, asking clerks about a suited traveler with no name. In January 1949, baggage room staff at the Adelaide railway station directed police to an unclaimed brown leather suitcase. The luggage had been checked in on November 30th, 1948. Just one day before the body appeared on the beach. Investigators placed the suitcase on a metal examination table and snapped the brass latches open. They sifted through neatly folded trousers, shaving tools, and a stenciling brush used by merchant seamen. The detectives noticed a deliberate effort to erase ownership. Every single identifying tag on the garments had been snipped away with scissors. Only 3 items retained the faint name Keane, which police soon realized was a purposeful misdirection. The investigation ground forward through the early months of 1949, burdened by a severe lack of communication between state police departments. The fragmented legal jurisdictions of Australia meant that fingerprint records in Adelaide were not cross-referenced with registries in Melbourne. Detectives instead focused entirely on the torn piece of paper. They issued a public plea to locate the specific copy of the poetry book missing its final page. A local man walked into the police station holding a rare edition of the Rubaiyat, claiming he found it tossed into the back seat of his unlocked vehicle near the beach. Forensic examiners flipped to the back cover and discovered faint pencil indentations pressed into the paper. Under ultraviolet light, the indentions revealed 5 lines of random capitalized letters resembling an intricate cipher. Military intelligence officers spent weeks analyzing the letters, ultimately declaring the code unbreakable. The back cover of the poetry book held another crucial clue. Detectives found an unlisted telephone number written faintly near the cipher. Officers traced the telephone line to a house located on Moseley Street, resting just 400 meters north of the spot where the body was found. The number belonged to a young nursing student named Jessica Thompson. Detectives arrived at her doorstep, expecting to break the case wide open. They showed Jessica a plaster death mask cast directly from the face of the deceased man. Observers noted she appeared shaken, yet she rigidly denied knowing the man or anything about his arrival. The police protocols of 1949 granted immense deference to middle-class citizens, allowing her to simply refuse further questioning without facing a formal subpoena. The local nurse remained an uncooperative barrier, and the specific connection to her property proved to be a frustrating dead end that haunted investigators. The 1950s and 1960s passed with agonizingly slow progress. The unknown man was buried in a modest plot beneath a tombstone reading, simply "The Unknown Man Found at Somerton Beach." The physical evidence sat locked inside a dry, temperature-controlled evidence room at the South Australian Police Headquarters. The original leather suitcase and the strange clothing were tragically discarded by administrators clearing space, an infuriating loss of crucial historical data. The only remaining physical connection to the man was the plaster bust created by the coroner prior to the burial. Decades rolled into the 21st century, with amateur sleuths and international journalists constructing wild theories about Soviet spies and black market poisons. The true narrative remained buried under layers of sensationalism behind the scenes. The rigid plaster bust held a secret waiting for the right scientific key. In the 2000s, dedicated researchers recognized that standard police techniques had failed. Professor Derek Abbott from the University of Adelaide began a methodical review of the archival materials. He examined the plaster breasting in the museum archives, noting the coarse white material preserving the contours of the man. Abbott discovered that when the plaster was poured over the deceased man, it trapped several distinct hairs from his scalp and eyebrows. Traditional forensic laboratories refused to extract the hairs, citing strict institutional protocols against damaging historical artifacts. Researchers spent years navigating complex bureaucratic hurdles and appealing to legal authorities for permission to access the biological evidence. Police granted permission to extract the tiny strands from the hardened plaster. The researchers secured the hair, but the biological material was severely degraded, presenting a massive technological challenge. They needed a specialized facility capable of reading fragmented genetic codes. The year was 2022. Forensic experts isolated the damaged hair shafts, extracting a complex genetic profile from the biological material. The sequence was incomplete, requiring meticulous reconstruction by skilled technicians. American genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick joined the effort, utilizing specialized techniques to amplify the faint genetic markers. The team uploaded the rebuilt profile into massive public genealogical databases. Millions of data points cross-referenced in seconds, searching for familial matches across generations. The digital net widened as distant cousins appeared on the computer screen. The researchers mapped the ancestral connections by hand, tracing the lineage through 19th century birth records. They followed the intricate roots back to the state of Victoria. The family tree narrowed down to a single branch, isolating a family of siblings born in Melbourne. The researchers eliminated brothers based on documented death dates, leaving one name entirely unaccounted for. The name was Carl Webb. The elaborate spy theories shattered instantly, dissolving the international espionage narrative into nothing. The grand illusion ended right there. The unknown man was simply a grieving electrical engineer. He was a broken man chasing the ghosts of his past. Archival records proved Carl Webb had traveled to South Australia to search desperately for his estranged wife Dorothy. His poetic code was likely just a personal shorthand for his own troubled mind. He had been hiding in plain sight as a heartbroken citizen all along. The formal identification of Carl Webb fundamentally changed the historical record of South Australia. The South Australian Police confirmed the findings, officially replacing the moniker of the Somerton Man with a real, verified human name. While the genetic mapping answered the question of his identity, it provided no definitive proof of how the poison entered his system. The exact chemical agent and the mechanical method of its ingestion remain lost to history, leaving a faint shadow over the final moments of his life. However, the discovery stripped away the sensationalized media circus that had stolen his dignity for decades. Carl Webb was returned to his proper context as a tragic figure battling immense psychological pain. The public finally saw a man broken by a domestic collapse rather than a fictional operative carrying state secrets. The surviving relatives of the Webb family received the news with profound astonishment. They finally learned the tragic fate of the uncle who had vanished from their family history so many decades prior. The resolution closed the book on a deeply personal end that had been misunderstood by generations of armchair detectives. Justice, in this case, was the restoration of truth and the defeat of rampant speculation. The relentless, methodical application of modern science pierced through 74 years of silence. Yet, the power of persistent citizens unraveling impossible mysteries does not end on the shores of Australia. In 1968, another unknown figure wrapped tightly in a heavy canvas, Partolin would ignite a legendary 30-year search by an obsessive civilian sleuth in rural Kentucky. On the afternoon of May 17, 1968, the air across rural Scott County, Kentucky, was thick with the droning hum of spring cicadas and the scent of damp limestone. Wilbur Riddle walked slowly along a brush-choked ditch roughly 5 feet from the gravel shoulder of United States Route 25, his eyes scanning the weeds for discarded glass utility insulators. Instead of glass, his boots brushed against a heavy green canvas tarpaulin wrapped tight with thick nylon rope and wedged deep into the tall grass. The canvas was a weathered tent shroud bound with deliberate, mechanical precision by someone who intended for its contents to stay hidden forever beneath the shadows of the roadside cedar trees. When local authorities cut through the tight bindings later that afternoon, they uncovered the weathered remains of a young woman who had met a brutal end without leaving a single trace of her name behind. Before she became a grim local legend in rural Kentucky, Barbara Ann Hackman lived a vibrant and purposeful life rooted in the tight-knit neighborhoods of working-class Ohio. Born in the year 1943, she grew up surrounded by the comforting routines of mid-century Midwestern life, where porch swings swayed in the evening air and neighbors knew every family on the block. Barbara shared an intensely close bond with her siblings, especially her sister Rosemary, who remembered her as a devoted young woman whose primary source of joy was her family. As she entered her early 20s, Barbara sought independence and stability, eventually entering a marriage with a man named George Earl Taylor. The family observed early subtle shifts in Barbara during family gatherings, noticing that George exhibited a rigid, controlling temperament that frequently isolated her from those who loved her most. Despite these quiet tensions, Barbara focused entirely on her future, harboring deep hopes for a peaceful home where she could raise children away from conflict. Her life in Ohio was anchored by strong personal dignity, regular family Sunday dinners, and an unwavering loyalty to her blood relatives. She was a woman who cherished connection and stability above all else, making her eventual isolation all the more agonizing for those she left behind. In the mid-1960s, George Taylor uprooted Barbara from her familiar Ohio surroundings and relocated their small household south to the bustling city of Lexington, Kentucky. At 24 years old, Barbara was now navigating the heavy, overwhelming responsibilities of motherhood while caring for the couple's precious infant daughter. To keep food on the table and support the child she adored, Barbara took on long, demanding shifts as a waitress at a fast-paced Lexington restaurant. The physical distance between her bustling workplace on the neon-lit city streets and the oppressive, quiet atmosphere of her home life measured less than 5 miles. Yet the emotional divide was immense. Her daily routine revolved strictly around the survival and well-being of her little girl, waking before dawn to manage household chores before spending 8 hours on her feet serving customers. George maintained a suffocating grip on the household finances and social interactions, systematically severing Barbara's ability to make routine long-distance telephone calls to Ohio. She endured the unpredictable volatility of her domestic life in absolute silence, protecting her daughter while quietly dreaming of finding a way back to the safety of her siblings. Every action she took during her final months in Lexington was dedicated to shielding her child from the growing darkness inside their home. Late in the year 1967, the regular letters and sporadic telephone check-ins from Lexington abruptly ceased, dropping the Ohio family into a void of silence. Rosemary and the rest of the Hackman family felt a deep instinctive dread as weeks turned into months without a single holiday card or phone call from Barbara. When relatives finally managed to track down a working telephone number and contact George Taylor directly, his tone over the receiver was completely flat and dismissive. He informed the family, without offering a single shred of physical documentation or emotional distress, that Barbara had simply packed a right-hand suitcase and abandoned both him and their infant daughter for another man. This narrative was precisely crafted to exploit the societal stigmas of the late 1960s, framing the victim as a reckless runaway to deter her family from asking deeper questions. George never walked into a police precinct, never called the local sheriff, and never filed an official missing persons report with any law enforcement agency in Kentucky. His calculated refusal to involve authorities ensured that Barbara's disappearance remained entirely off the official grid, leaving zero record of a missing 24-year-old mother in state or federal databases. By controlling the flow of information across state lines, George engineered a jurisdictional blind spot that trapped her family in a perpetual state of unresolved grief. 5 months after that final silence began, the physical reality of Barbara's fate surfaced alongside a desolate stretch of highway roughly 10 miles north of her Lexington home. On May 17, 1968, Wilbur Riddle navigated the sharp curve of United States Route 25 near Georgetown, where limestone outcroppings meet thick tangles of wild honeysuckle. The weather-beaten green canvas bundle resting in the ditch was roughly 5 feet long, secured with heavy rope and wrapped around a piece of asbestos boarding that kept the contents rigid. Local deputy sheriffs arrived on the scene within the hour, carefully unknotting the bindings to reveal the preserved physical evidence of a young woman wearing a blue and white blouse. Because George Taylor had never reported his wife missing to the Lexington police, the detectives standing over the canvas wrapper in Scott County possessed 0 names, 0 identification cards, and 0 leads. They held the remnants of a local life in their hands. Yet, the systemic absence of communication between neighboring cities meant they had no way to know the victim lived just a short drive down the highway. The exact timeline of her disappearance had been successfully erased by her husband's lies, leaving authorities to face an absolute mystery in the spring grass. The unidentified woman was cataloged purely as a John Doe equivalent, entering the local records under the haunting title of the Tent Girl. The investigation inside Scott County immediately collided with the rigid, archaic law enforcement protocols that defined rural police work in the year 1968. Detectives cataloged every physical artifact with meticulous precision, documenting the green canvas tent wrapper, the specific brand of nylon rope, and the distinctive dental fillings of the young woman. They printed physical paper flyers bearing a composite sketch of the victim and mailed them by postal service to county sheriffs across central Kentucky and southern Ohio. Yet, because no centralized state or national database existed during that era, vital information stopped dead whenever a piece of paper failed to cross a desk or county border. An Ohio family searching for a missing daughter had no legal or structural mechanism to review a Kentucky coroner's report regarding an unidentified woman found inside a canvas shroud. The Scott County coroner held the preserved remains at a local Georgetown funeral home for weeks, hoping that a grieving relative would walk through the double oak doors to claim her. when those heavy doors remained shut through the summer heat. The compassionate townspeople of Georgetown pooled their own personal funds to purchase a burial plot in the local cemetery. They buried her beneath a simple granite headstone inscribed only with the words, "Tent girl born about 1940, found May 17, 1968. For the next 20 years, the official police investigation sat frozen inside gray steel filing cabinets while the Hackman family in Ohio continued their agonizing, independent search for answers. Rosemary checked every possible lead within her reach, mailing handwritten letters to state agencies and calling telephone directories whenever her family budget allowed. Meanwhile, George Taylor maintained his absolute comfortable silence in Kentucky, raising Barbara's daughter while living under the protective cover of jurisdictional blindness. Law enforcement officers in Ohio could not legally investigate a crime that had never been reported within their state boundaries, and Kentucky authorities could not connect their unidentified victim to a family living 300 miles north. The specific legal loophole lay in the complete absence of mandatory interstate communication and the lack of standardized dental record sharing between state medical examiners. Every passing year deepened the thick sediment of forgotten paper files, leaving the victim trapped beneath the heavy rural Kentucky sod, while the person responsible walked freely across the state line. Detectives occasionally revisited the tent girl file during slow winter months, yet without a name to anchor the evidence, their theories spun in endless, frustrating circles. The rigid separation of local police jurisdictions effectively granted the perpetrator a 2-decade head start against the truth. The turning point did not emerge from a police precinct or a forensic laboratory, but from the quiet front porch of Wilbur Riddle's home during the late 1980s. Riddle told the haunting tale of the 1968 discovery to his 17-year-old son-in-law, a curious young man named Todd Matthews. Matthews listened intently to the precise physical details of the canvas wrapper, the exact geographic location along United States Route 25, and the lingering injustice of the nameless granite headstone. The young man absorbed the heavy burden of the unsolved mystery, resolving to build an informational bridge across the void that had thwarted professional detectives for 20 years. Throughout the early 1990s, Matthews spent countless hours sifting through physical newspaper archives at public libraries, photopopping aging microfiche of the original discovery articles. He drove out to the Georgetown Cemetery, standing before the gray headstone to map the spatial distance between her silent resting place and the bustling highway where her future was stolen. He realized that conventional police procedures of that decade were structurally incapable of solving interstate cold cases without dedicated citizen intervention and public data sharing. Matthews committed his evenings and weekends to organizing the fragmented evidence into a cohesive file that could bypass traditional bureaucratic roadblocks. As the mid-1990s arrived, Matthews harnessed the emerging transformative power of the early personal computer and dial-up internet connections to revolutionize the investigation. He constructed a rudimentary text-heavy website dedicated exclusively to the tent girl, meticulously uploading the forensic measurements, dental charts, and photographs of the canvas shroud onto the public web. Night after night, the blue glow of his monitor illuminated his small desk as he scoured early online bulletin boards and regional missing person registries. He manually cross-referenced every single female disappearance from the late 1960s across the states of Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The tedious process required checking exact height estimates, age ranges, and timeframes one by one, without the aid of automated algorithms or modern search engines. His relentless persistence compensated for the ongoing systemic failures of the criminal justice system, which still lacked a unified national platform for unidentified human remains. Matthews essentially built a one-man clearinghouse for lost souls from his living room, determined to force the digital age to answer the questions left unresolved by 1960s police work. Every failed lead only sharpened his focus on the narrow window of time surrounding the spring of 1968. In the early spring of the year 1998, while scrolling through a newly updated online classified board for missing adults, Matthew spotted a fresh profile posted by Rosemary Hackman. The detailed entry described a 24-year-old mother named Barbara Ann Hackman who had vanished from Lexington, Kentucky during the final months of 1967. Matthew stared at his monitor, feeling his pulse quicken as he matched the physical descriptions. The geographic proximity between Lexington and Georgetown, and the exact window of disappearance. The spatial mapping was undeniable. The driving distance from where Barbara lived with her husband to the ditch along United States Route 25 was barely 20 miles. He verified the dental similarities between Barbara's known Ohio medical records and the detailed chart preserved by the Scott County coroner 30 years earlier. He picked up his telephone and dialed Rosemary's number in Ohio, knowing with absolute certainty that the conversation he was about to initiate would shatter 3 decades of manufactured deception. When Rosemary answered the call, Matthews gently walked her through the evidence, connecting the missing mother from Ohio to the famous, unidentified woman resting in the Kentucky ground. That single phone call bridged the 30-year informational gap that had protected George Taylor for a lifetime. Matthew spoke directly with Rosemary. The emotional connection was instantaneous. The physical facts aligned with absolute perfection. Rosemary contacted the Scott County coroner immediately. Law enforcement verified the digital leads without a moment of delay. The Kentucky medical examiner approved a formal legal exhumation of the grave in Georgetown. On March 2, 1998, investigators gathered under the cold morning sky. Heavy earth-moving machinery rolled across the damp grass of the cemetery. Workers dug down through 6 feet of heavy clay soil. They lifted the concrete vault from the earth. The time for deception had finally expired. Forensic specialists transported the exhumed remains directly to the state laboratory in Frankfort. Dr. Emily Craig and her forensic team examined the preserved physical evidence. They extracted cellular pulp from the teeth for revolutionary genetic testing. Scientists compared the ancient cellular material directly against fresh DNA reference samples provided by Rosemary. The rigorous scientific process demanded complete precision and undeniable accuracy. On April 23, 1998, the state laboratory issued the official results. The genetic profile matched. The dental records confirmed every single contour. The woman wrapped in canvas was officially Barbara Ann Hackman. George Taylor's decades-long lie was entirely dismantled by the absolute precision of modern science. The formal identification brought undeniable clarity and truth to the case. Yet full legal accountability in a criminal courtroom remained forever out of reach due to the passage of time. George Earl Taylor, the husband who had spun the malicious narrative of abandonment and left his wife in a ditch, never faced a jury of his peers. He had succumbed to cancer in the year 1987, dying a full decade before the DNA match exposed his absolute guilt to the world. Investigators publicly identified him as the primary suspect responsible for the brutal end of his wife and the concealment of her body inside the canvas tent shroud, while the legal system lost the opportunity to place him behind prison bars. Historical truth stripped away his false reputation permanently. The Hackman family finally learned that Barbara had never abandoned her precious infant daughter, restoring her honor and validating their 30 years of agonizing grief. The truth erased the stigma that had hung over her name since 1967, proving that her final acts were defined by survival rather than abandonment. In the aftermath of the identification, the town of Georgetown gathered once again at the peaceful cemetery located just off the main highway. Stonecutters altered the base of the famous granite headstone that had borne the name Tent Girl for 30 long years. They carved her birth name, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor, along with her correct dates of birth and discovery right above the original inscription, so her true story would never be forgotten. Her surviving daughter, now a grown woman with a life of her own, stood at the gravesite and finally connected with the devoted mother who had been stolen from her in infancy. Todd Matthews transformed his citizen sleuth breakthrough into a lifelong crusade, helping establish the DOE network and the National Missing and Unidentified Person System to ensure no victim remains trapped in bureaucratic silence. Yet even as Barbara reclaimed her true name from the shadows of Kentucky history, another long-forgotten woman wearing a distinctive fringed leather jacket was waiting to be brought home along an interstate highway in Ohio. In the cold spring of 1981, a local motorist made a grim discovery in a rural Ohio ditch. An unidentified young woman wearing a fringed buckskin jacket met a violent end. For 37 years, a phantom predator believed his evasion was absolute. He never anticipated the relentless evolution of microscopic DNA. The world of the late 1970s and early 1980s offered a vast open road to young wanderers. Hitchhiking across the United States remained a common practice. 21-year-old Marcia King embraced this transient lifestyle with a trusting heart. She grew up in a quiet Arkansas community surrounded by close family ties. Marcia possessed an adventurous spirit. She traveled across state lines, seeking new horizons away from her childhood home. Despite her continuous movement, she maintained a steadfast connection with her mother. She called home to share her geographic location and offer reassurance. Her mother treasured these phone calls, keeping the landline active at all times. The family never imagined the profound vulnerability Marcia faced on those lonely Midwestern highways. The vast interstate system presented an alluring freedom mixed with hidden severe dangers. Predatory individuals prowled these concrete arteries looking for isolated travelers. Marcia carried a distinctive sense of style characterized by a braided hairstyle and bohemian clothing. Her most treasured possession was a fringed buckskin leather jacket. She wore this jacket day and night, securing warmth during cool spring evenings on the road. Her daily routine involved waiting at truck stops or entrance ramps, trusting strangers for transport. This lifestyle required immense optimism and an inherent belief in human goodness. Marcia never realized she was walking into a trap set by a calculated predator. Her mother waited by the telephone in Arkansas, anticipating the next scheduled check-in. The ringing stopped in the early spring of 1981, replacing her cheerful voice with a deafening silence. We must map the physical geography of Miami County, Ohio. Interstate 75 runs north and south, carrying thousands of commercial trucks every day. A few miles west of this massive thoroughfare sits Greenlee Road. This quiet rural farm road features deep drainage, ditches, and spaced tree lines. Sodium streetlights do not reach this isolated stretch of asphalt. On the morning of April 24, 1981, the temperature hovered in the low 40s. A local motorist navigated this remote road minutes after sunrise. The driver noticed a strange shape resting in the tall weeds of the drainage ditch. He stopped his vehicle and stepped onto the damp grass to investigate. He found a young woman lying motionless, wearing bell-bottom jeans and a fringed buckskin jacket. First responders rushed to the rural scene following a panic dispatch call. Miami County detectives arrived and secured the perimeter with heavy yellow tape. They observed a distinct lack of physical evidence scattered around the grass. The young woman wore no shoes, and her personal identification was missing. The perpetrator removed her footwear and purse to hinder the investigation. Detectives noted significant trauma to her neck and head, indicating a severe physical struggle. Her life was taken hours prior to the discovery, leaving her body preserved in the cold air. Investigators cataloged her unique clothing, assigning her the placeholder name of Buckskin Girl. The complete absence of a driver license or wallet presented a massive hurdle. A phantom predator discarded her like debris and vanished back onto the interstate, leaving a profound mystery in the Ohio dirt. The Miami County coroner initiated a meticulous autopsy on the afternoon of April 24th. Toxicology reports returned clean. Ruling out chemical impairment, the medical examiner confirmed the exact mechanisms ending her life. Investigators rolled her fingertips onto ink pads to secure her unique friction ridges. Detectives mailed these physical fingerprint cards to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington District of Columbia. The federal databases searched through millions of records without returning a single match. Local police officers printed thousands of missing person flyers featuring a facial sketch. They distributed these flyers across every truck stop and diner along Interstate 75. Truck drivers pinned the images to bulletin boards from Michigan down to Florida. None of these grassroots efforts generated a viable lead, stalling the case in its first week. The lack of a centralized missing persons database in 1981 crippled the investigation. Arkansas police held the missing person report filed by the mother of Marcia, Ohio. Police held the physical evidence of the unidentified Buckskin Girl. The rigid, paper-based communication protocols of the era prevented these two departments from connecting the files. Days turned into weeks of silent telephones and dead-end tips. The Miami County community decided to grant the unidentified victim a proper farewell. Residents gathered at Riverside Cemetery in Troy, Ohio, to bury her remains under a donated headstone. The stone bore the simple inscription naming her Jane Doe. Detectives packed her distinctive jacket and remaining physical evidence into a cardboard box. They placed this box onto a cold shelf in the evidence room, locking the door on the active phase of the investigation. The Miami County coroner made one critical, forward-thinking decision before the burial. He extracted a vial of the victim's blood and placed it into a standard storage refrigerator. He understood future technologies might extract secrets hidden within her cellular makeup. Forensic science advanced at a glacial pace throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Investigators reopened the file to compare dental records against new national databases. Every dental comparison resulted in a frustrating negative match. In the year 2016, scientists applied stable isotope analysis to strands of her preserved hair. The chemical signatures in her hair shafts revealed elements of the local drinking water she consumed. This analysis indicated she spent time in the southwestern United States before traveling to Ohio. While fascinating, this geographic timeline failed to produce a concrete suspect or a legal name. Law enforcement pursued numerous false confessions over the ensuing decades. Convicted predators serving life sentences claimed responsibility for her demise to gain notoriety. Detectives wasted countless man-hours interviewing these inmates and verifying their alibis. Travel logs and prison records proved these confessions false. The perpetrator maintained absolute silence, hiding behind the anonymity of the victim. Down in Arkansas, the mother of Marcia endured a specialized form of psychological torture. She refused to change her home telephone number or move to a different address. She paid the utility bill every month for 37 years, waiting for a single phone call. The unknown predator stole her daughter and trapped the mother in a perpetual state of unresolved grief. The legal system offered no remedies for a family lacking physical proof of a crime. The landscape of criminal investigation shifted in the year 2018. A nonprofit organization called the DNA Doe Project approached Miami County authorities. They offered a radical new approach utilizing investigative genetic genealogy. Investigators retrieved the original vial of blood from the evidence refrigerator. The blood had degraded after 37 years of basic cold storage. Laboratory technicians applied specialized chemical washes to extract fragments of intact genetic material. They amplified the microscopic samples using complex polymerase chain reactions. the laboratory mapped hundreds of thousands of genetic markers. They translated this biological map into a digital data file. This file matched the exact formatting required by open-source ancestry websites used by amateur genealogists. The digital file entered the GDmatch server in the spring of 2018. The search algorithm scanned millions of user profiles in a matter of seconds. A match flashed across the screen, linking the unidentified victim to a distant family tree. Genealogists isolated two distinct individuals sharing the genetic relationship of a second cousin. The research team constructed a massive family tree working backward from these cousins. They traced marriage certificates, census records, and birth announcements through the 20th century. The branches converged on a single family residing in the state of Arkansas. The researchers identified a 21-year-old woman missing from public records since 1981. The genealogy team contacted Miami County law enforcement with the definitive truth. The phantom wall of anonymity shielding the predator shattered upon the revelation of her true name. Detectives requested a direct DNA swab from the mother in Arkansas. The laboratory compared the maternal sample against the degraded blood from the vial. The genetic sequence aligned with absolute mathematical certainty. Jane Doe ceased to exist in the official records of Miami County. The young woman left in the damp grass of Greenlee Road reclaimed her identity as Marcia King. The predator had relied on her nameless status to evade detection. That perfect evasion evaporated the moment her name echoed across the national wire. Forensic genealogy pierced the veil of secrecy, utilizing nothing but microscopic codes. The science erased 37 years of silence in a matter of hours. The investigation shifted from a question of identity to a targeted hunt for the perpetrator. Miami County authorities held a formal press conference to announce the identification. They replaced the generic headstone at Riverside Cemetery with a marker bearing her true name. The mother of Marcy received the phone call she awaited for almost 4 decades. The news delivered profound devastation paired with immense, long-sought clarity. She no longer had to wonder if her daughter was trapped in an abusive situation. The identification of Marcia King marked a historic milestone in law enforcement. She became the first unidentified victim in history to reclaim her name through genetic genealogy. This breakthrough established the precise legal protocols used to solve hundreds of subsequent cold cases. The individual responsible for stealing her future remains unidentified to this day. The newfound knowledge of her movements leading up to April 1981 provides detectives with a distinct geographic target. The predator who committed this act walks with a false sense of security. Every remaining piece of physical evidence from the Buckskin Girl case undergoes continuous modern testing. The exact genetic techniques that restored the name of Marza now focus on the microscopic trace evidence left at the scene. The statute of limitations does not exist for this level of crime. Biological relatives of the perpetrator submit their profiles to ancestry databases every single day. The invisible net draws tighter around the individual who stalked Interstate 75. The legacy of Marcy King serves as a permanent warning to those who believe time ensures their freedom. Her restored identity stands as a testament to the uncompromising persistence of forensic science. The truth remains buried in the blood, waiting for technology to unlock the door. We now turn our attention to the overarching lessons learned from these shattered illusions. The perfect evasion is a fragile illusion, highly vulnerable to the relentless progress of modern forensic science. As laboratories continue to turn microscopic fragments into undeniable truths, we must ask ourselves how many more secrets are currently resting on borrowed time. Thank you for watching, and click the video on your screen for more solved mysteries. The perfect evasion remains a fragile illusion vulnerable to the relentless progress of modern forensic science. As laboratories continue to transform microscopic fragments into undeniable truths, a chilling question remains. How many secrets are currently resting on borrowed time? Thank you for watching. Please click the video on your screen to explore another investigation.